Okay.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Regent Mayron. How are you?
Good. You can hear me okay?
I can hear you and see you great. Thank you.
All right. I'm going on mute. Thanks.
Hello. We never get to finish.
All right, I'm going to call to order the June 2022 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And thank you to those who are joining us here, those joining us via live stream video, and via Zoom, as our chair, Mayron, is via Zoom today, and I think Regent Ruth Johnson is as well, and Student Representative Emily Kurtz. And so welcome to all of you, and also welcome to Flora Yang, our student representative here in person this morning. I'll note at the outset that we've added an update on Twin Cities campus safety, public safety, to the agenda today, and that replaces an overview of the employee engagement survey, which we will definitely come back to. It's in the work plan and it's important stuff, but to make room for equally important stuff, we moved the agenda around a little bit. So that will be, I think, item 5 on our agenda. But we got lots to do today, so we'll jump right in. The first item for action today is the President's recommended fiscal year 2023 annual capital improvement budget. And President Gabel, Senior Vice President Franz, and Vice President Bertelsen, who I see at the table, are here to take us through changes since we reviewed this last month. And are we going straight to Vice President Bertelsen or President Gabel first? There we go. President Gabel.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan, and a very happy birthday to you.
Oh my, thank you.
Members of the committee, as part of the Board of Regents policy, the administration is directed to develop a capital budget with a 6-year time horizon updated annually. Since this agenda item was reviewed at the May meeting, we've updated our capital budget to reflect the Minnesota legislature's adjournment without the passing of a bonding bill. So before you today is a resolution authorizing projects totaling nearly $188 million to begin design and construction during the next year. So Mr. Chair, as you described, Senior Vice President Myron Franz and Vice President Mike Bertelsen are here to discuss this annual capital budget in more detail, and at this time I will defer to them. Thank you.
Very good. SVP Franz, anything?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair, and an honor, out of respect for you, I will not sing happy birthday to you.
That could result in some disciplinary action if you do. So.
I know I would, I guarantee you. The capital budget we bring to you today is unfortunately not including state-funded projects, as President Gabel mentioned. We're disappointed that the legislature did not pass the bonding bill during the regular 2022 legislative session. However, we remain optimistic that there is still an opportunity to pass one if there is a special session. In a scenario where there is a bonding bill passed during a special session, we will come back to you for approval of those projects and any changes at a future board meeting. I also want to mention that we have started the consultative process to develop our next state capital request. This planning ensures that we will be ready this fall to bring you the updated 6-year capital plan and the 2023 state capital request for your review and action in alignment with the state deadlines for our proposal to be considered during the 2023 legislative session. Hope springs eternal, does it not? For today, though, Vice President Bertelsen has prepared an abbreviated presentation that outlines the capital budget you're looking at today to approve, and we seek your approval to advance these projects. If it's okay, we'll let Vice President Bertelsen take over, Mr. Vice Chair.
Very good. Thank you. And you have the floor, Vice President Bertelsen.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Regents. I understand abbreviated, so there we go. First, just a quick reminder, the annual capital budget represents the first year of our 6-year plan. It includes all projects greater than $1 million, as well as approval of pools of funds, including for repair and replacement. The annual capital budget authorizes major projects to move into design and construction for the coming fiscal year. Anything appearing on the list must have completed pre-design and be fully funded to be included in this budget. This is the breakdown of the broad categories in the capital budget. As you know, we rely greatly on the state for the substantial portion of our capital funding, and without these funds, what remains is a university-funded projects, a mere 18% of the preliminary $1 billion we brought to you in May. Details of these changes are here on this slide. This gives you an overview of what's changed since we were here in May. And we will now, of course, as SVP says, we will wait for the outcome of a hopeful special session. This slide details the R&R pools and the major line item projects that comprise the FY23 capital budget. R&R projects are used to tackle many needs such as elevator upgrades, HVAC and mechanical upgrades, parking lot resurfacing, lighting conversion, and so forth. Descriptions for the line item projects can be found in your docket materials. This slide represents the distribution of the R&R pools and the projects by source of funds. So you can see that major projects make up for 2/3 of the budget, and R&R the remaining 1/3. Debt makes up about 40%. University debt makes up about 40% of the total capital budget. Oops, I was off by a little bit. Oh, I guess. And with that, we will take any questions you have.
Very good. Thanks to all three of you for that introduction and that run through of the slides. As we know, this matter was before us last month with these updates, so it's before us today for action. And I'm wondering if there's a motion to recommend approval of the capital budget.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. I see no hands raising. Anyone online? Mr. Langworthy?
No,
There's, very good.
Sure.
Yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. If the state were to call a special session and possibly pass a bonding bill, is this something we could quickly reconsider and amend?
Senior Vice President Franz.
Mr. Vice Chair, Regent Kenyanya, yes. So one of the things that we will do is so many of the projects that are on the approval list for the state that we requested state funding are really ready to go. And what we will do is, depending upon the meetings of the board, we'll make sure we get to you as quickly as we can, or a special meeting if necessary, to make sure we can really implement those as soon as we possibly can. Because there are several projects that are literally shovel ready. If that's not, Vice President Bertelsen, we have things on that list that are ready to go. We'll be ready to move quickly.
Good. Follow. Regent Powell.
Just a quick clarification, Chair McMillan, Senior Vice President Franz. So you did say, I mean, this would require the situation, a special meeting of the board.
Senior Vice President Franz.
Mr. Vice Chair, depending on the timing, it may be that it happens right when there's a board meeting coming up. We'll obviously use that board meeting if it makes sense. But if it's out of alignment, for example, I'm thinking of that August where we don't have a board meeting, that might require some action, but we'll have to see. Yeah.
Good. Yes, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we go into this, and we don't know that, it's a kind of a guess at this point whether there'll be a special session, but to the extent that you've got kind of a split legislature and a lot of dynamics right now, how do we as an institution, then talk about what because I think you can sort of incentivize a joint session to consider funding projects to the extent that you can make both sides, comfortable with it. How do we engage in that, or are we kind of set with what we already had talked about and that's just going to be what it's going to be?
Senior Vice President Franz.
Mr. Vice Chair and Regent Rocha. Well, it's a good question. It depends. I hate to say that, but and right now it's pretty well set. The bonding bill was, I don't know what percent it was done, but it was pretty wrapped up in the sense it was a $1.4, $1.5 billion bonding bill. So it's hard to start unpacking that with a supermajority required for the passage of that bill. So I think the likelihood of that bill changing very much is pretty low. So we're probably pretty much set with what they had in there, which frankly was not as much as we would like. But there's also some infrastructure, federal infrastructure money that's needed to be acted upon too. And so there's really an impetus for that bonding bill to get passed sooner rather than later, but we can only hope at this point.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Seeing no hands waving wildly online there and no more raised hands in the room, I'm going to ask for a vote on the President's recommended 2023 capital improvement budget. All in favor? Aye.
I,
Opposed? That matter carries. I had the opportunity to travel to Alexandria and see Regent Emeritus Anderson, so he would be disappointed if I didn't rap the gavel on the completion of a matter of business, so. Anyway, on to the annual operating budget next, our second item. Again, this was reviewed last month and for action today. And I believe, yes, there's our Assistant Vice President, or Vice President Tonneson, and at the table, ready to go to provide a final overview of the operating budget. But before we do that, I think President Gable's got some introductory and framing remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan and members of the committee. So today we bring before you for action our recommended fiscal year 2023 annual operating budget. It remains unchanged from what we submitted for review at the May meeting, with the exception of 2 minor corrections on 2 attachments. Neither alter the intent or the revenue and spending estimates in the budget. So members of the committee, this proposed budget reflects our commitments through our strategic plan, MPACT 2025, and into the future to support our students, faculty, and staff, and to lead the way in a fiscally responsible manner. It also reflects our challenges, difficult decisions, sound adjustments, and commitments to advancing research, partnerships, and innovative ideas. And Mr. Vice Chair, it reflects the spirit, resiliency, and shared sacrifice of every member of our university family. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Tonneson to provide insights. Thank you.
Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and thank you, President Gable. Vice President Tonneson has prepared a few slides to summarize this year's budget request. After the debate and discussion we had in May, we think it's appropriate to sort of set the parameters of what you'll be considering. And so with your permission, Vice Chair McMillan will ask Vice President Tonneson to go through her short presentation.
Excellent. Vice President Tonneson.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan, Senior Vice President Franz, and President Gable. This morning, we have just a quick refresher, if you will, on the primary components of the budget that are before you today for approval. And I will start with the all funds revenue estimates for the budget. Projected revenues total $4.2 billion across all funds. 33% of that, in the red piece of the pie, is restricted to unit and or purpose by granting organizations, contract partners, state and federal governments, donors, et cetera. 9% is derived from rates or charges associated with our businesses. That would be student housing and dining, bookstores, parking. 18% is unrestricted at the unit level and results from educational sales, fees, clinical income, royalty income, and so forth. And then the final 40% is the total tuition and state O&M, or operations and maintenance appropriation, the fully unrestricted funds for the institution. The estimates are for FY23 are up $75 million in total from this year, but the increases by source do range. Some are actually decreasing slightly, as in ICR, and some are increasing, the largest being roughly 35 million from tuition and also from miscellaneous sales and services. Attachment 1 to the budget document on page 76 of your docket materials contains the detailed estimates by major fund group. On the expenditure side, we're projecting a total of $4.1 billion, which is up 2.9% from the current year. On attachment 1, again, you would see the spending by function and also by object of expenditure category. The largest percentage increase is the cost for fringe benefits paid by the university, an increase of 15%, coming from a very low spending level this year. Beyond that, total spending on salaries is anticipated to increase 4%, while increases in most other categories vary and do incorporate the planned necessity to buy less or buy differently in response to inflation while remaining within available resources. The final 2 slides today summarize our proposed plan specifically for the framework funds of tuition and state appropriation. Focusing on the specific incremental resource changes in our framework, we're proposing an increase in available resources of $87.1 million. The majority of the incremental resources, or 58%, comes from the roughly $50 million related to internal reallocations and the impact other revenues have on the framework. As you recall from May, this category includes 28.1 million of internal budget cuts and reallocations, averaging 1.4% across the base of all of our units. And 60% of those cuts will come from position eliminations or changes in positions. And the remaining 40% would then come from reductions to non-compensation spending items like travel, professional development, and so forth. The rest of that 50 million will come from a variety of things, $9.7 million in other revenue growth that will pick up some of the framework costs next year, 3.6 million of tuition revenue above budget this year in some units, and 8.7 million of central and unit balances to bridge to future recurring actions. Moving down the list, the second component of Resource Solutions is tuition revenue, which is 34.5 million from the proposed increase in rates, enrollment increases, and the tuition surcharges on the Twin Cities and Duluth campuses, both from the previously approved phase-in of those surcharges, as well as the proposed rate increases on the Twin Cities campus. As we displayed in May, the projected change in tuition, fees, and room and board for a Minnesota resident undergraduate living on campus does vary by campus and varies from, in these recommendations, 2.5% on the Crookston campus to 4.5% on the Twin Cities campus, all well below the current rates of inflation. And finally, there is a small amount, as this graphic shows, just 2.5 million of incremental new state appropriation that was actually received in FY22, but not committed to anything this year on a recurring basis. The last slide highlights the proposed framework investments. The clear priority in new spending is directly tied to Impact 2025, with a 3.85% compensation increase for the faculty and staff that are essential to achieving our goals as an institution. In the framework funds, this will cost us $51 million beyond what we are spending today. In addition, this budget allows for an additional $13 million in unit level initiatives tracked to the strategic plan to add to the over $30 million we initiated this year in initiatives. Following that top priority, this budget addresses the tuition shortfall in some units this year, which is estimated at approximately 15 million, and it tackles other unit-specific financial needs. And finally, the annual cost increases for utilities and vendor licensing and maintenance agreements for our large enterprise systems are also incorporated into the spending plan. Vice Chair McMillan and members of the committee, that is a very quick summary of the recommended budget. As you are aware, the budget document and the attachments include many details, and we are happy to answer any further questions the committee may have. We do believe this budget recommendation balances many competing priorities in a responsible and effective package, and we ask for your approval.
Very good. Before I open this up for questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the President's 2023 annual operating budget.
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
We're ready for discussion. Yeah, Regent Hibsch and Regent Powell.
Just a quick question on the tuition, page 46 in our docket. All of the units are increasing except for pharmacies at 0%. Could you explain that?
Yes, Vice President Tonneson.
Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Hibsch. Explain why pharmacy is not increasing.
Right.
Pharmacy is experiencing enrollment challenges, I shall say, and their tuition rate is high relative to competitors. And so as an effort to try to stop the loss of enrollment, they are proposing to keep their tuition flat.
Thank you.
President Gable, something to add on that?
Just very briefly, and those enrollment challenges are national. That's not just our College of Pharmacy.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Follow up, Regent Hibsch?
No.
Regent Powell?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I want to make a comment and then a question. First of all, as Vice President Tonneson said, I just want to acknowledge this is a really challenging budget. And whenever you have 2% revenue and 4% cost increase, we hope it's that it stays there. You've got a challenge, and I just want to acknowledge that from my point of view, the team has done a good job of threading the needle, if you will. And I just maybe acknowledge a couple of points. Really a lot of resourcefulness, I think, and good trade-offs in bringing this all together. I want to acknowledge that I think the compensation increase of 3.85%, I think you mentioned 4% all in. I mean, it's needed, and I think we had to have that in there. None of us are thrilled with the tuition increase at 3.5%. I guess I thought it might be more. So I think the fact that we landed there well below inflation, which is still running at over 8%, I think I can live with that. I want to comment on the TIP transfer to the consolidated endowment, which was, a part of the, process of managing this. I think the board has been asking for that consideration for a number of years. You've done it. And by making that transfer, it set up a number of, solves. That's funded $8 million to set up the principal repayment fund for the Century Bank, which we wanted to do right away. It's really prudent, so we've done that. $7 million to cover shortfalls at system campuses, $10 million of multi-year funding for PEAK, which is itself going to be a long-term generator of productivity. I mean, that'll repay many times, but it gets us going there. So that's $25 million that I think through good management and resourceful management, that would have had to come from somewhere else. And so we were able to bring that into play as well. And so I that's good, and I appreciate that. And finally, I know this is outside of, our bailiwick, but I do want to acknowledge the $7 million above trend money that we received from the University of Minnesota Foundation. And I just want to thank the foundation board for doing that. Very timely, very helpful, in this year, really helps us to advance strategies. So a lot of, initiative, I think, and resourcefulness in making this come together. So my question is, my view is that I think this tilts to risk in the sense that I hope inflation, comes in where we thought it would, but the Federal Reserve, everyone seems to, it's not coming down the way we thought it would. And so the question is, do we have capacity to manage inflationary increases above what because I think that's the more likely scenario, above what we had built into the budget. That's my question. I'm done.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Nice summary of the challenge of balancing limited resources against unlimited needs here and rising needs. So appreciate that. And now turning to Vice President Tonneson for a thought on managing the risk around inflation.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. Regent Powell, I would say simply, yes, we do have plans and we do have the ability to address inflation should it continue to come in high. I would answer it in a few ways actually. One is the units, and I've mentioned this before, but units tend to, and I believe in this budget, continue to underestimate revenues and overestimate expenditures. One of the ways they overestimate expenditures is by budgeting for full employment, and very few units see full employment the entire year. So it's not uncommon at all for us to have savings that aren't reflected in the budgeted amounts essentially every year. So that's one piece, and that is continuing. I do believe that. Secondly, we had low spending in F1, even lower than we projected. And as a result of that, we have some wiggle room. There are reserves kind of throughout the institution, and it continued this year to a lesser extent, but we are in a good position in the units right now in terms of having reserves. We also have reserves held centrally, aside from central reserves as a fund. We do have pieces of or buckets, if you will, that we are planning for non-recurring investment that could be delayed. So we have the capacity to address costs that we might not be anticipating at this point. And then central reserves, I have to say, the experience on the investment side has been so positive that we, in this budget, are almost back up to our board policy guideline for central reserves. I anticipate we will exceed that the following year. So even central reserves is in a good position compared to where we thought we would be a year ago. So I think with all of those pieces, that gets into the weeds a little bit, I apologize, but I think with all of those pieces together, we are in a good position to be able to handle unanticipated cost increases.
Thank you.
Very good. We're going to go to Student Representative Yang and then Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you so much, Vivi Tonneson, Vice Chair McMillan, and members of the board. This is more of a comment than a question. Per the operating budget recommendations, student wages have increased slightly to $11 an hour. And I would just like to take the opportunity to thank President Gable, members of her office, as well as anyone who was involved in making this initial step happen. We are appreciative of the fact that the university recognizes that basic needs of a lot of students on campus cannot be met by the amount that we get paid by the university, and that conversations about increasing wages are still happening behind the scenes. However, at the moment, the increase in student wages is just insufficient when put in comparison with the 3.5% increase in tuition, the 4 to 8% increase in the costs of room and board, as well as the close to 5% increase in student service fees. So we've heard extensively about how inflation is impacting the decision that the university is making about increasing tuition, which is understandable. But students would like to take a moment to highlight that inflation impacts everyone's day-to-day lives as well. For example, a survey done a few years ago by Boynton Health suggested that more than 1 in 6 of the University of Minnesota students report worrying about whether their food would run out before they had money to buy more. So that looks like about close to 9,000 or close to 10,000 students at the university level. Similarly, about 85.8% of students are worried about financial problems, money, and the economy, which is something we'll hear more about tomorrow during the PRISM report. So these issues are making it difficult for students to stay enrolled, and increasing affordability for students will most likely significantly benefit retention rates, which is directly in alignment with the goals of NPAC 25. So while students know that this operating budget will be voted on today and will most likely pass, we are anticipating the moment when students, as one of the main stakeholders at the university, have our needs and well-being prioritized as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative Yang, for those thoughtful remarks. We'll turn to Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. I have one really, well, maybe not simple, but hopefully quick question. I was reviewing the public comment documents, and something caught my attention on page 145 from an alum of the university, where she talks about her husband and her both attended the U of M and must have students here, or students thinking about coming here. And she mentions that the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, is soon changing and will no longer take into account families with multiple children in college. So I guess I'm just wondering if that's true, or if anyone knows anything about that. And if we don't want to put anyone on the spot, so certainly can follow up on that later. But that seemed pretty significant to me. So I'm just curious if we know anything about that.
Senior Vice President Franz tells me they'll find someone with an answer. I don't see Vice Provost McMaster. When FAFSA comes up, he's usually the one we call on, but we won't put anybody directly on the spot, but they're working on it.
Great, thank you.
Others with comments, questions on the operating budget? Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. This is it's a challenging puzzle to put together a budget of this magnitude, and I'm pleased that this is at a committee of the whole of the board. At one point, it was before half the board, and this is a good thing that we have this discussion, in large part because there's, other than the strategic plan and the retention of a chief executive, this is the strongest policy moment that a board like ours has at a public institution like this. I'd ask, we received some information in between the previous discussion and this meeting, and I appreciate that we received that. To a large extent, the first question that was answered in the feedback that we got as a board wasn't the question that I was asking. It wasn't about that relationship. It was really about where we are tuition-wise, our students, and what we're paying. Because we, at least as far as a matter of policy, the schools that I believe that we would compare ourselves to, and I don't think we should always be driven by comparisons. I think a lot of it should be based on our mission and based on our responsibilities as a public institution. We're high, and an increase on top of, when you're starting from a higher base, an increase even above that puts you even farther away. 3.5% on a $15,000 tuition bill is 50% larger than 3.5% on a $10,000 tuition bill, which is where our peers are starting. And I've thought a lot about how we have this dialogue. And again, I'm either fortunate or cursed to have the experience of being on this board at a time when it was substantially less expensive. The administrative costs of the institution were substantially lower. And with the advent of student loans and the flood of money that came with that, we've had this massive increase in tuition. We've had this massive increase in administrative salaries and administrative costs, and which is leaving a lot of students with a lot of debt. We have reports that the debt is either leveled off. It's still a lot of money for the people that are graduating. It's having an impact on what they can do when they grow up, what they can choose as careers. But I also don't think it's an accurate representation of the debt. I do know that a lot of people are moving away from student loans, and so the fact that we use that as the only indicator of the burden that families and students are left with when they graduate, I don't think that's right. People understand that student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. They understand that there are other ways of getting access to credit, whether they're graduating with huge credit card bills or taking out mortgages on family homes and so on. We don't get that data. We don't know that in full, but I do know from an anecdotal standpoint that it's a huge issue. And so when I look at our students, there are a lot of shareholders, there are a lot of stakeholders in the University of Minnesota. As a land-grant university, it's the people of the territory, now the state. But I look at students not as customers, as a source of revenue, but as really the preferred shareholders. They are the people that we ultimately will look at as those who make a mark on this community and the world. And so from that standpoint, I can't support a budget that provides an increase when we're already this far out of line. I understand that we talk about some of the differences with our neighbors to the east. They're a great example at the University of Wisconsin because they're ranked very highly as an academic institution. And I do understand that they have a larger non-resident base, and those non-residents are paying more tuition. Well, that's on us if we're not matching that proxy for quality, which is the non-resident tuition rate. But I also know that Madison in particular admits a higher percentage of in-state applicants. So while it's a lower percentage of their overall student body, resident students, as a Wisconsin resident, you have a better opportunity to be accepted to that college. And there's a lot more going on beyond that. But nonetheless, we're substantially more expensive than the University of Wisconsin-Madison is for their students at their flagship. And I think that's a problem. So to the extent that I will succeed in the motion, I think it's still reflective of demonstrating to the public that there is a concern about this from members of this board. And so with that statement, I would move to amend the budget to freeze the resident tuition across the board. I could get into more specifics than that, but I think the easiest way of doing it is freezing it for resident tuition across the board, and then directing the administration to make priority adjustments on the expense side to address that decrease in revenue.
Is there a second for Regent Roche's motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion around freezing in-state tuition.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would just request a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. Discussion before we have a roll call vote.
Stewart, the main motions.
Yeah, I think that Regent Mayeron, I know you've got your hand up. Student Representative Kurtz does as well. I believe both those hands are to the main motion and not Regent Roche's amendment. But if so, please signal to me.
Well, I'll just say to you, my hand is up to the main motion, and I will say I will not support Regent Roche's motion, but I'll address it when we address the main motion.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Mayeron. Others? Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, members, I was hoping that this amendment would not be offered to the budget that President Gable has brought together in a very thoughtful and a very balanced way. You know, every action we take has a consequence, folks. And if we are going to reduce the tuition moderate, half of what inflation is at 3.5%, inflation being about 8.5%. Comparable to Minnesota State, I think they're at the same level at 3.5%. The consequence is, in our budget, there are going to have to be reductions in some place or another. I think the tuition increase is about $35 million. Shake your head, yes. Yeah, no, that's okay. You don't need to drill because I think it's 34.5.
Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Swigum.
Vice President Tonneson.
In total, from the rate alone, though, for this motion, it would be 20 million, just to be clear. The rest of it's enrollment and the surcharge and so forth.
Very good clarification, $20 million.
Yep.
So folks, we have to look at our budget, and while sometimes it gets a little detailed for us, if the Rocha amendment passes, there is a consequence that we have to have for services or programs that we provide to our students. So if the Rocha amendment, I will not amend the amendment, but if it passes, I will give you the opportunity in specific to balance the budget ourselves. Where can we do that? Well, we can take the 3.85% increase for our staff and faculty, and probably, if I'm in the back of an envelope, make that 3.85 about 2.0. Pretty close in that number. So I will be offering that amendment to you to make the choice of where we will find the money from. Or I will give you the opportunity to take it from the Promise Scholarship. The Promise Scholarship, we spend about 28 million, so it would be a couple million more than we actually need. But I will give you the opportunity to directly be forward and honest with your amendment. It's not a free shot, folks. You don't get a free shot. You can take a cheap shot, but you don't get a free shot. I will give you the opportunity, if either of those amendments fail, to look at our system needs and reduce the 4.2 million that's going to our system campuses of Duluth, Crookston, and Morris that is in the president's budget. If that were to fail, I'll give you the opportunity to reduce public safety. I think there's an additional 1.2 million in here for public safety over the $15 million base. If the Rocha amendment passes, I'll give you the opportunity to be very honest and fair and direct with your actions to a consequence of eliminating that 1.2 million. We all know in the last week's actions how important it is to address that. Cybersecurity, there's new money in here for $1.3 million. I'll give you an opportunity to address that. And I'll go down to the Impact 2025 enhancements, which are in this proposed budget of President Gable's. Should my amendment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fail, so you can be honest with your actions. That's all I'm asking you to do. Just balance your actions with the consequence. No free shots. You can, in fact, if you were to offer the amendment, Regent Rocha, and have your amendment balanced, I might even be willing to support it. I'd be willing to support it probably. If you want to eliminate promise scholarship, I could be there with you if you make the right direction, you make the right argument, and if it's be balanced. But let's not take free shots. The system is big, 4.1 billion. Just take it out of there. Well, tell me where you're going to take it out of. That's all I'm asking. Just be fair, be honest, be upfront. I speak against the amendment, Mr. Chair. But if it passes, I will follow up with amendment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6.
Okay, Regent Hips on the Rocha amendment.
Yes, it's on the Rocha amendment.
Very good.
I'm speaking against the Rocha amendment. And the main reason is I think on that list of Regent Swigham's, the main one is wages and employee benefits. And I think that going forward, what makes a great university is great employees. And if we start reducing our costs, we're going to start losing our key employees. And if we start losing our key employees, we're not going to get the great students that we get. They come here for a reason. They come here because we have great faculty and great human resources. So I think this budget has good balance between tuition increase and wage increase, and we need both. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swiggum.
I am sorry, but I need to follow up with Regent Hips' comment. Regent Hips, I do not believe that the main one is necessarily salaries.
Okay.
I believe the main one is public safety. If not that, promise scholarship. If not that, our system needs. If not that, salaries of faculty. No, I do agree with you. I'm trying to make the point that they're all important.
Correct.
All right, Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just clarification, and I guess it would be an amendment 7 that we don't want to go to, in my view, is you talked about finally backfilling the reserves. And that the reserves, to me, are not a source for a one-time kind of event like tuition freeze. They're for fires or for floods, cyber security attacks, inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be a correct view for me to have and for us to consider?
Vice President Tonneson, thoughts on central reserves?
Yeah, Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Davenport, members, in budgeting, we think of the reserves exactly as you explained. That ideal use of them is for one-time only unanticipated needs. We do sometimes use them, as we are recommending in this budget, as a bridge to a future planned recurring change, but they are meant to be covering one-time things. This motion would decrease revenues on a permanent recurring basis. So we would be looking to permanent recurring expense reductions.
Thank you.
All right, other thoughts, Regent Rocha on your motion. Then we're going to call for a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just making sure, does Student Representative Kurtz going to the main motion, or is?
I think she was on the main motion, but Student Representative Kurtz, thank you, Regent Rocha, if I misinterpreted.
I am on the main motion, though perhaps another idea on Regent Svigum's list of things that we could cut in response to Regent Rocha's idea is the $7 million in strategic money that the president's office gets.
Okay, Regent Rocha, did you have more follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's a nice segue into my response. I would suggest that if we want to make this bombastic, we should add amendment, I think we're on 8, that this would require us to cut the electricity to the life support systems at the hospital. I mean, if you want to just simply find the most sort of grave and threatening items of expenditure in a $4 billion budget, you can do that. But we spend $1 billion a year on administration. We spend about $100 million a year on consultants. I mean, there are a lot of areas where we can make those adjustments, and remarkably, many of our peers, in fact, most of them in this region, have found a way of meeting all of those expectations while having a much lower cost to their preferred shareholders, the students. We just heard that, what, roughly 9,000 students have food insecurity. So how many days, I would ask my colleagues who have their charge list, how many days should they go without food then to meet the additional 3.5%? We have an 8.5% potential inflationary rate. That translates into the additional cost for all of our students. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to receive that additional income from their employment or for their families, if they even have family support. This is a big deal. And every single time we have a race come before us, we can make all of those same arguments. We can make all of those same claims. It is putting us in a position where I think we have a hard time defending where we are in that respect to the people of the state that expect this public board, each of whose members does not get paid for this public service, to stand up and explain why this public asset that at one point in time was supposed to be offered free of charge to the people of the state to pursue a better life for themselves and for their fellow citizens. And so to that extent, I plan to vote in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. And before I ask Mr. Langworthy to read the roll, I will just thank the administration for the added information that came about Wisconsin, Minnesota comparisons. And for me, that underscored the complexity and the number of moving parts that are involved in a decision a student has to make, and total cost of attendance is important. The in-state, out-state ratio is important, and there's just a lot of things to balance here. But that's the kind of cost competitiveness information that I really appreciated. And at the last meeting, I think I was focused on the system campus piece, but talking about our flagship's important. So thank you for that. And Regent Rocha, I respectfully, disagree with pulling out tuition only and highlighting that, but it certainly, you're accurate in doing so. But to me, the whole package has to be looked at if we're going to spend time on competitiveness of our costs, which we should be doing. So we're ready for a roll call vote. Mr. Langworthy.
On the Rocha amendment, Regent Davenport.
No.
Regent Davenport votes no. Regent Farnsworth.
Yes.
Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Hipsch.
No.
Regent Hipsch votes no. Regent Johnson.
No.
Regent Johnson votes no. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Powell.
No.
Regent Powell votes no. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Swigum.
No.
Regent Swigum votes no. Regent Talurabe.
No.
Regent Talurabe votes no. Regent Verhalen.
No.
Regent Verhalen votes no. Chair Mayron.
No.
Chair Mayron votes no. Vice Chair McMillan.
No.
Vice Chair McMillan votes no.
There are 9 no votes, 3 yes votes, so that amendment fails, and we'll return to discussion and debate and questions around the main motion to approve the president's 2023 annual operating budget. And I'm going to start with Regent Mayron and then follow up with Student Representative Kurtz on the main motion. Regent
Thank
Mayron.
you. Thank you. I just want to address some of the information that actually came out during Regent Rocha's discussion on Regent Rocha's motion, but a couple things. One is I think it's critical if we're going to talk about what's changed over the years, whether it's increase in expenses, administration, wages, that sort of thing. I think we have to address the elephant in the room that is, to me, truly driving what's changed, and that is what has happened by the contribution by the state of Minnesota to the revenue side of our budget that has an enormous impact on tuition. Regent Rocha talks about years ago when he was a regent. I can tell you years ago when I was an undergrad, which was in the late 60s, early 70s, the legislature was contributing approximately 70% of our budget for operating expenses, which allowed tuition to be remarkably low. My memory is I probably spent $350 a quarter for tuition at that time. Now the legislature, the state provides approximately 17%. And Vice President Tonneson can correct me, but the point is our partner on higher education has greatly diminished its contribution. And there are only so many sources that we can look to address our budget. And unfortunately, much of that falls on tuition. If we're going to have this great institution, if we're going to even make a stab at paying our faculty and employees what they are owed, there are only so many sources that we can look to, and unfortunately, tuition is one of them. The other elephant in the room is inflation. I mean, you know, a year ago, we weren't talking about 8% plus in inflation, but that's a real number that we need to address. It impacts every part of the cost side of the equation. So I think if we're going to talk about the fairness of this budget, I think, and compare ourselves to others, we have to make sure that we are addressing both sides of the equation, which is not only the source of revenues, but what's happened on the expense side, for which we have virtually no control. For all those reasons, I will be voting in favor of the proposed budget by the administration.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. Student Representative Kurtz, there you are. You have the floor.
Thank you. So this is just a quick comment that I don't anticipate will change any minds on this budget, but I hope it'll be food for thought in future budgets. About a month ago, a graduate student group presented a petition to administration to raise our pay to livable wages. The president's office refused to respond until COGS signed on in support, despite the fact that the majority of grad students signed on to that petition. Once COGS did sign on in support of this, administration kindly made incremental change on one request and ignored the rest. If this university is dedicated to shared governance as it claims, it isn't readily apparent to graduate students. Furthermore, I made a point last month of arguing that graduate students are also graduate workers. We hear a lot about concern over compensating faculty fairly to recruit and retain talent, but this never seems to be a concern with regard to recruiting and retaining graduate student talent. I have seen a number of prospective graduate students choose to attend other universities because the pay there is actually livable and better. Other currently attending graduate students have dropped out because they can't afford basic necessities. One point in the response to the pay petition was a dedication to compare our grad students' pay to other universities. I personally wonder why this hasn't been done before, and I hope that we do choose to do that. I hope that's information that is shared in budgets in the future. We've seen comparisons for admin pay and faculty pay and how it compares while controlling for cost of living to other peer institutions, but it's never showing up in grad student pay. So I hope that in the future, that's something that's showing up. I urge you to take that promise seriously. I have a hunch that you'll find that we are underpaid compared to our peers, especially when accounting for cost of living, and perhaps even when not accounting for it. And if that research shows that this hunch of mine isn't true, that'll be a good start in signaling that you actually do care about grad students and our concerns and the work that we frankly do to keep this university running.
Thank you, Student Representative Kurtz. And I think next on the list is Regent Talia-Rabe.
Vice Chair McMillan, thanks. I wanted to just chime in a little bit here and both echo the sentiment of Regent Mayron in terms of public support for the expenses here at this university. I think, you know, it is really important that we think about the tuition of students, but it always surprises me how much we have turned public education into a private enterprise. And that means that when we are sitting here, we are not just thinking about one thing. And I think from the public testimonies last time too, almost nobody came in here with a recommendation of how to balance things, and everybody wanted more, right? And so that means that we're tasked with a very complicated responsibility of trying to make things work. And I think that we can all agree that when our students here succeed, our whole state benefits. And so I hope that what what it does, even if we pass this budget, it is really about this moment in time of what we need to do for this university, because there is not another entity of equal stature in this state for researchers, for students, for the economy, but also to continue to push the legislature to increase their support for this university in order for us to kind of then have a different discussion. So when I look at the budget and I see the, 2% from the state, that's disheartening, given how much this university contributes to the state. So I just wanted to kind of share that sentiment of why this is so difficult, right? It's not just about what I personally care about tuition costs and making sure that that is reasonable, and that we are looking at ourselves in terms of who we are in competition with, if so to say, but also I think that it is important to look at the benefits and also the difficult task of having to pass budgets that are in an environment such as this. And so I just wanted to offer those comments and share a little bit about why I am in support of the budget that is in front of us now.
Thank you, Regent Tao Urabe. I believe when I was a student at UMD in the late 70s, early 80s, the state contributed 49% of my cost of education. And I believe, what is it, 17, 16 now, something in that range. So it's, anyway, I add that comment with the vice chair's prerogative. I have a couple people who want to speak, three of them, 4 or 5 of you, and 3 of you have already spoken. So I'm going to start with Regent Kenyanya because he hasn't yet on this topic, and you're up. And then I'm going to come back to Regent Rocha, Powell, and Farnsworth in that order.
Okay, I wasn't ready, but no, I don't trust that you'll come back, so I'll take it while I have it. All right.
Jeannie, we need you back here soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You want me to cut in now or what?
Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree, and like the conversation that a couple of my colleagues have had about state support. I was not around the university in the 70s, but from my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, I think what we're saying is true, but there has to be some acknowledgement that that change didn't just happen. The state didn't cut half the support, the budget grew, right? And I think the percentage is lower, but I mean, we got to talk about the numerator and the denominator there. And I won't give specific numbers, VP Tonneson, and make you nod or not nod about them. I think we generally agree that, we obviously need the state to support public higher education more. And I know our government relations team is always on top of that. And to the extent that we can all support that advocacy, it's important. But we can't act like that's all that happened. The budget grew, right? So I think the university has to acknowledge that portion of it. And there are states that have actually cut, real dollars, really devastating ways. I mean, we know which states those are. And, thankfully this isn't one of them. So just wanted to make that comment. I also wanted to not speak to the previous motion, but to things that came up during it. I agree with some things that everyone said, some of what Regent Swigum said, Regent Rocha said. One point I do want to highlight from Regent Rocha is that the arguments that Regent Swigum made aren't brought up when we're talking about certain expenses, namely compensation and some other things. And I think we're all guilty of that, right? We pick our argument I know I do when it's expedient, but there's other times where it's like, well, Regent Kenyanya, didn't you say this last month? And I think it applies everywhere. So that's just something we have to be cognizant of. My colleagues have really elaborated why it's a difficult budget, especially when you consider the inflationary effects, which obviously the students live with, the staff live with, but so does the university, in trying to manage expenses. And that's how I find myself at the appearingly conflicting way of supporting the resolution, the amendment and the main resolution at the same time. My comment is just going to reiterate, I think a great conversation we had when we reviewed this last month, and I think we focused a lot on conversation about the budget process, the budget model, and how we can address issues that we see every year, namely system campuses. But we're back here having similar conversations on the budget side, on enrollment side, and Regent Mayron, I think, reminded me last month that this is a part of Impact 2025. So I'm looking forward to, I think it's the next fiscal year when we get into that portion of Impact 2025 of looking into the budget and the model, and just having a conversation of if it just still makes sense to do it the way. And I don't know, I don't have the answer to that, Regent Powell, but hopefully that's a conversation we'll have at the maybe at a retreat and in other settings to be able to discuss that. So no question from me there, and I do plan on supporting the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Regent Powell, and then we'll be to you, Regent Rocha first. Sorry, I said that. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. And Regent Kenyanya, you kind of touched a little bit on what I wanted to say. First, I want to request also a roll call vote, because I think as a public body, all of our substantive votes should be identified by roll. But in response to a couple of things that have come up in talking about the main motion, I actually love the fact that we're having this dialogue. I would very much appreciate if on our schedule we could have a full-blown discussion about tuition, the relationship with state funding, because unfortunately it always ends up in this circumstance where we run into these challenges, like where you're going to cut as we're sitting around the board, which is a pretty darn tough thing to do. But fundamentally, with what Regent Mayron initially introduced, and then has been commented by a couple of our other colleagues, it is a numerator-denominator challenge. If the state is giving us $3 for every $1 for tuition at UMD in the late 70s, and we decide to raise tuition by $2, now the state is only giving us half, because it's 3 and 3. And if we multiply it, add $5, now it's only 1/3 when it used to be 75%. That's the challenge here. The fact is, if you take a historical view, and some people are forced to take it based on their experience, the fact is that over the course of the last 25 years, administrative salaries have more than tripled after being adjusted for inflation. To cover that, tuition has more than tripled after being adjusted for inflation. That by itself is going to dramatically change the percentage that the state is providing to the university to support higher education. In addition, the state also shifted quite a bit of money to go directly to students. It doesn't go to the public schools anymore. So that's going to have an impact as well, which takes a little bit of the sting out of these massive increases in public tuition, but nonetheless comes nowhere close to covering it in total. And so from that standpoint, and the fact that the amount of money available for research and the university's focus, when you look at what our total budget has done over time, if you add that into the mix, it's going to make the state contribution seem even less dramatic. So I would ask board leadership if that would be possible for us to get a dialogue to really get into the nuts and bolts of tuition, to understand what is happening, why it's happening, and how we can address that, so that students that are having food insecurity or other challenges in being able to afford an education at the university can receive some relief, especially for future generations. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to support the main motion, simply because, as I think I've been consistent over quite a while now, that we are out of line where we should be from what we're charging our resident students based on the factors that we've already discussed, and that I don't think that this increase and the increase in the other costs for our students are taking us in the right direction. Thank you.
Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. Just a couple of comments. One has to do with, the state support, and Regent Rocha commented, commented on the impact of student debt programs, which I think that's true. I think, as I understand it, that the onset of those programs were kind of a catalyst. The other significant change that's happened really in all 50 states has been demographically driven, which is, the population has aged. And so when you look at state budgets across the country, the shift over the last 30 years has been towards pensions, healthcare, really, truly, healthcare for guys like me. And so what used to be, maybe, hundreds of billions is now trillions of dollars across the country in these state budgets. And that's been another, I think, huge factor that has forced state legislatures across the country to shift. As when I was running for this office, as one of our legislators said, what are we going to do? Throw your grandmother out in the snow? I mean, we just have to fund those things. So that's the first comment. And to the point that's already been made, we can obviously and should spend more time on this. The other point to me goes to the other elephant in the room, which is mix of students. And I think it's really important to note that University of Wisconsin, a great institution over many decades, has set up a deep network of recruiters across the country to build their non-resident student population. And where, it's almost half of the population now. I believe the number is 10 or 12,000 more students on campus or more. It's a lot. It's a big number, and they're paying $38,000 a year. And so we've had a different approach. And we have over 70% students from the in-state, which we're proud of. I'm not arguing, but the mix of students at many institutions across the country is very different. My guess is the estimate at Wisconsin, it's $40 million of incremental revenue a year that comes from that, decision basically to have a different mix of students. And so to the degree that we have a conversation about revenue and tuition, that mix piece, I think, is a really important part of it, because we could choose to push harder on that, and it would generate very significant revenue, and it would help. It would help this problem that we have. So that's the comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Let's see, Regent Farnsworth, and then Regent Swigum, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Langworthy to call the roll.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. A few comments, and some of what I wanted to cover was already covered by colleagues, but just a few reflections. I think the questions and the comments that Regent Mayron and Regent Talierabé have brought up about legislative support are really important conversations to be having. And I think that I hope that that's something that our board can further explore, along with our government relations team and other members of administration, about why we think that that's happening, and take that into consideration as we move forward. As several have noted, when it comes to MPACT 2025, I was trying to look for it here quick, but when you're scrolling and looking for something during a board meeting, I usually can't find it in the moment. But the points in MPACT 25 that are coming up, and Regent Kenyanya mentioned one of them, with the budget model, and really looking forward to that aligning nicely with our next fiscal year, and really I'm hoping as a board we're able to dig into those conversations, because I know we've heard from UMD and other places, particularly in the system, around concerns from stakeholders around how we do our budget modeling. And I want to learn more about that and look forward to those conversations. I think it's nice that aligns well with where we're at in MPACT 2025. The thing I was just referencing that I couldn't find, and maybe because I'm just thinking it's in there and it's not, is a similar strategic plan tenet around tuition strategy, and being able to dig into that in a more strategic way as a board, as opposed to getting to budget season. There's motions brought forward, and we have a little bit of conversation in the context of a motion around the horseshoe, and then we move forward to the next cycle. I think whether it's in a retreat setting or some other kind of setting, being able to dig more into that. The third thing I mentioned, related to tuition strategies, I think it was Regent Verhalen who brought up last month NRNR tuition, and a question around that. And that's another area. We talk a lot about in-state resident, but curious to talk more about what the historical approach has been to NR&R tuition, how we think that looks like, what we think that looks like moving forward. So, you know, in a big package such as the budget, you have to balance the pros and cons. I think there's important investments being made into our strategic plan. Obviously, I supported the Rocha amendment because I tend to believe in really prioritizing accessibility and affordability for our students. But like Regent Kenyanya, I supported the last amendment and will be supporting the main motion, this budget, because I think when looking at something like this, you know, you have to look at the pros and cons. But those are some of the things that I'm hoping we can discuss in the next cycle to avoid, you know, getting to the action part of review and action, and then having some of these conversations in the context of a motion, and then we just go forward to the next cycle. I know we've had some of these conversations, and hope with those 3 examples that I highlight, we can dig more into that in conversational settings amongst the board ahead of next budget cycle. So thanks to everyone who worked on this, and thanks Vice President Tonneson for the presentations to us. And thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Swigum, you're going to close this up, and
Chairman, I'll be very, very quick.
thank you.
Probably duplicative, because it feels good to agree with and be on the same page as my friend Regent Rocha, Regent Powell, and Regent Farnsworth's last comments. It feels good. So even though I'm duplicative, I'm gonna say it. First of all, regarding the state, we all wish we would have received more money from the state of Minnesota. There's no doubt about it. But the fact is, the trend in every state, all 50 states, the trend is that the university higher education receives less dollars, at least as a percentage, not as a dollar amount, but as a percentage of the budget than we did 20, 30, and 40 years ago. And the needs are there with public safety and with healthcare, Regent Powell, as you mentioned. We're not going to kick grandma out of the nursing home. It's not going to happen. So I think we need to recognize that the state has been there. A little more we'd like to have, but they are there for us. And especially when you consider the amount of money the state has put into higher education grants and scholarships. I mean, that has exploded, the money directly to students. So, I mean, that has to be factored in and put in there in our thought process as well. My closing comment is I would hope the points were made about tuition. We didn't agree, although I would have agreed. If you would have balanced the amendment, I would have been there for you. Just tell me where you're getting the money, and I would have been there. But the amendment was not balanced. I couldn't do that out of fairness. I couldn't do that out of being fiscally prudent and responsible. But now is the time, fellow regents. We've heard them. We understand. Now is the time to come together. This motion should pass unanimously. President Gable has worked with their staff. She's consulted with faculty, with students, with needs around the university to meet our mission. Points were made. Now, as Regent Farnsworth came to, it's time to come together as a board, cooperatively working together, and pass the president's budget unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair or Vice Chair and Regent Swigum. So my closing comments before asking Mr. Langworthy to call the roll are really in the vein of the danger of what I'll call cherry picking, you know, and pulling one issue out for comparison to 30 years ago. And we're all guilty of it. But if I think about, I wasn't on the board when you were, Regent Rocha, the first time, but I've been around here quite a while. And just in my time, you know, the changes in research productivity, the improvements in graduation rates, the growth in the university's role in philanthropic support for students, you know, challenges around cyber, mental health didn't exist as an issue. It existed, but we didn't acknowledge it and we didn't address it very much back 11, 12 years ago. Just cost and fringe benefit growth. And it's just, it's a complex puzzle and there's a lot of moving parts. So I hope when we do have these discussions again, and I can say very, very heartfully that this administration and the one before it have worked to push this dialogue back in our governance calendar very, very dramatically from what I first saw when I got here in 2011. And, but as they do that, we all have to avoid the urge to pull an issue out, say, boy, that one's wrong, and we got to do something about it, and help bring our governance thoughts to the table and honor the complexity and the many, many moving pieces that make up a budget. So in that vein, I will support it. I'm like Regent Powell, not happy with 3.5% on this campus, happier with 1.75% tuition increases on the system campuses, because that's about half of Minnesota State's apparent increase, and those system campuses compete directly with those people. So that feels a little bit better, but I don't see a better solution, and I will be supporting the president's recommended budget. So, Mr. Langworthy, please call the roll.
On the main motion, Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Farnsworth.
Yes.
Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Hitch.
Yes.
Regent Hitch votes yes. Regent Johnson.
Yes. Yes.
Regent Johnson votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
No.
Regent Rocha votes no. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent Talurabe.
Yes.
Regent Talurabe votes yes. Regent Verhalen.
Yes.
Regent Verhalen votes yes. Chair Mayron.
Yes.
Chair Mayron votes yes. Vice Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Vice Chair McMillan votes yes.
There are 11 votes in favor of the motion to approve the president's 2023 operating budget and 1 vote against. That motion carries. And we are on to item 3 is Vice President Krieger. Assistant Vice President Krieger, I see her approaching, so while she's doing so, I'll provide a little bit of introductory here, and then I know Senior VP Franz has more, but our third item today is review and action. And this is on a substantial 12-year lease at 150 Broadway Avenue South in Rochester for student housing on that campus. And it's a big, important, and strategically critical item. And while we never are thrilled about review and action, the administration is going to explain to us why it came to us that way, and look forward to dialogue and action. So, Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I want to, first of all, comment on the hard work by Vice President Bertelsen and Assistant Vice President Krieger and their teams, along with Chancellor Carroll and her teams, for working together on this. Today, we bring to you a 12-year lease opportunity for a residential facility at the Rochester campus for your review and action. As you know, due to the real estate environment around the Rochester campus, we have maintained a practice of leasing property on that campus. The property we're considering today presents us with a unique opportunity due to its location and its capacity to help address our needs for additional housing at the Rochester campus. This need is to support the current and projected enrollment of Rochester, one of our Impact 2025 goals. Since learning of this opportunity, we have quickly worked to develop the housing program, a facility renovation plan, and terms for a proposed lease. We are seeking review and action today to enter into a lease so the facility can be renovated and operational in time to accept students for fall 2023. We recognize this opportunity came together quickly and requires swift action by the board. The property owner has given us a deadline to finalize an agreement so they can meet the timeline to convert the property to a residence hall. As you can imagine, it takes a great deal of lead time for an operating hotel to stop taking reservations, plan for a shutdown of operations, and conduct planning to begin construction activity and meet a strict opening deadline for us. Timing is especially of the essence here, given the current supply chain challenges and available workforce for construction projects. We appreciate the board's openness for moving forward on this opportunity, and I ask Assistant Vice President Krieger to provide an overview, if that's okay, Mr. Vice Chair.
Welcome to the committee, Assistant Vice President Krieger. You have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan and members of the committee. As Vice President or Senior Vice President Franz noted, today I present for you for review and action a proposed lease for student housing at 150 Broadway Avenue, Rochester, which can be found on page 160 of your docket materials. The property is currently operated as a hotel and is across the street from UMR's leased facilities in University Square. The hotel property is shown in green on this map. As a reminder, UMR's current lease facilities are located within the downtown areas known as Heart of the City and Discovery Square, as shown on this map in turquoise. And finally, the parcels in gold are the university's current land holdings, the sites designated in UMR's 2014 campus plan as the future long-term home of the UMR campus. The hotel property is well suited to be transformed into a 403-bed traditional style residence hall and will include study space and student lounges for its residents. The ballroom will be converted into the dining hall and will also double as UMR's much needed gathering space. And further, this proposed lease space also addresses UMR's student fitness and recreation needs that resulted from the closure of the Rochester YMCA earlier this year. The proposed lease will allow UMR to progress towards its undergraduate enrollment strategy and MPACT 2025 goals, increase UMR's ability to recruit first-year students, and support the region and the state of Minnesota through undergraduate education that addresses workforce demands in the healthcare industry. UMR continues to experience increased undergraduate student enrollment, with current housing demand exceeding our capacity for fall 2022. Further, high housing costs in the Rochester area make off-campus rentals cost prohibitive for most students. Without additional housing, UMR campus will need to slow enrollment growth and adjust the current MPACT 2025 goals downward. The comprehensive campus plan for UMR approved in 2014 is scheduled to be revisited by the university in fall 2023. This proposed lease provides a cost-effective addition to UMR's lease space portfolio, meeting short and mid-range student housing needs and providing facilities needed by UMR to continue to grow its undergraduate enrollment and support student success. In the current pandemic-impacted environment, underutilized space downtown that was not previously available makes this remodel option and lease possible. The proposed lease is with Titan Development, who is the university's longtime landlord at University Square. Titan Development will complete the leasehold improvements at their cost to convert the property from its current hotel use into the proposed uses, residential and student support, gathering and dining, and rec. The leasehold improvements are estimated to cost approximately $7.6 million. Following the renovations, the lease of the subject property will commence on August 1st, 2023 and continue through July 31st, 2035. The university has also granted 3 successive options to extend the term of the lease for 2 years each, which could potentially extend the lease until 2041. Annual gross rent, which includes operating expenses but does not include real estate taxes and utilities for the residential units and the 20,000 square feet of student support, rec, and dining space, will be just over $3 million for the first year of the lease. Gross rent will increase by 1.75% annually through the initial term and any exercise renewal options. And in addition to gross rent, the university will be responsible for its pro rata share of the annual real estate taxes and utilities, which are estimated to be approximately another $1 million during the first year of the lease. The lease payments will be funded through student room and board rates and student recreational fees. This transaction does come with some operational risks, which the administration has worked to manage. The first risk is related to room vacancies. As UMR grows, it is anticipated to fill all its housing capacity. But at the start of this lease, UMR will have up to 162 beds not filled by its students, which could lead to financial deficits in the early years. The campus is taking steps to manage this risk by planning to sublease vacant apartments in our existing 318 Commons housing facility. This successful approach was employed by UMR when it first launched its housing program, with students and residents from Mayo Clinic's education programs leasing apartments on specified floors in 318 Commons, with UMR gradually occupying additional floors as enrollment grew. This approach will continue as needed, although UMR's upper class students will have first opportunity to lease these available apartments in 318 Commons. Affordable rental property in downtown Rochester is still in demand, and relationships with Mayo and other educational organizations with students in need of housing are in place. The second risk is related to the dining program. This lease will utilize the facility as a traditional first-year residence hall, which requires the creation of a full-service dining program, which is new to UMR. The landlord is planning to develop and provide this program directly or via a third party, which will be negotiated via a separate service agreement with the landlord. If the university and the landlord can't come to an agreement on this program, the university maintains at its sole discretion the option to lease the necessary kitchen and servery spaces on site so that we could contract directly with a third-party food service provider. Though there remains some risk that the university could not successfully complete a dining contract and still be committed to this housing contract, the university has completed a site visit with a food service designer and builder to confirm the kitchen and the food service space on site is capable of meeting the university's dining needs. In summary, this lease solves our short and mid-range housing needs for UMR with the anticipated system refresh of UMR's comprehensive plan set for 2023. And while the proposed remodel and lease assumes short-term risks, we have worked to mitigate those risks and recommend this proposed lease to meet the timing of our enrollment needs at an affordable price. And with that, I conclude my overview of this transaction.
Very good. Thank you, Assistant Vice President Krieger. Before we can discuss, I'd welcome a motion to recommend approval of this.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. It's properly before the committee for consideration. And I'm going to open with just a couple thoughts and the way I'm kind of thinking about this. This looks to me to be an exercise in part in risk management, but also, and it feels to me as I look at the off ramps you've built into the contract to deal with where you just were, how do we bring this thing in for a landing and begin to deliver meals in an entire residential experience in a place where we haven't done that. And it looks like while there's still risk and plenty of it, you're managing that and you've got several levels of risk protection there. The second element of it that I think about is in a risk world would be how is UMR going to grow into this? And what I'd really like, if there isn't an opposition from any, or if others are in agreement, I would love to hear Chancellor Carroll connect a couple dots for us around how this fits with the strategic plan for UNR. Nothing deep, but that to me is the second layer of risk here, and it's an equally big one. And, you know, I know you need this, but talk a little bit, if you would, for the committee's benefit about how this fits your strategic growth plans.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan and Regents. This has been a cooperative effort, and so we're really grateful for the system team who's been working with us on this plan. In terms of our strategic enrollment growth, MPAC 2025 reflects what was previously the Bluff-Top View plan, and that we do continue to grow. And we have grown during the pandemic and project increased growth for fall. So we are currently at capacity in housing, and we'll have a shortfall. Certainly our upper class students are busy looking for housing right now. One of the things that's so important within our broad planning is the students and their academic success. And so rather than thinking only of they need a place to lay their heads, it is also true that students who are in structured living learning communities do better. They're retained better, and we have goals related to retention and MPAC 2025. They have timely completion, more likely to complete on time if they're in structured living learning communities as well. With this housing, we also put students in proximity to opportunity related to their career goals and to the workforce shortages in the healthcare industry. Those kinds of experiences while they're undergraduates have proven to, really drive the career outcomes as well. So in so many ways, this creative, I think, smart opportunity does a real service to our students and advances the goals of Impact 2025.
Outstanding. Thank you. And thanks for being available without any advance notice, but you reflect certainly your engagement here, and that helps me digest this as I think about a big piece of business on, a review action agenda. So enough from your vice chair here. Let's move on. Regent Farnsworth, you're first on the list. Then I have Regent Hipsch, and I think Regent Powell, did you have a hand up? Yep. Okay. That's the order. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. And I think the words I just heard were, this being smart and creative. And I would completely agree with that. To Regent McMillan's point, this certainly, the concept and thought of risk, of course, was clear to me when seeing this for review and action on the docket. But I think Assistant Vice President Krieger just addressed that and laid that out nicely in the presentation. I'm really excited about this, and I think it's important to say, and really my main point, I'm speaking to the students of UMR. We heard very clearly on a number of my new colleagues and I's campus visit to Rochester concerns around housing and dining. And students spoke very clearly and eloquently, but forcefully to some of the challenges around both residential and retail dining opportunities, in this case residential, and then what the housing landscape looks like at UMR, particularly for upperclassmen students. And of course, that housing conversation is different at every one of our campuses, and we have unique challenges and opportunities. But I think it's really important, at least from my perspective, speaking directly to the students of Rochester, to say, we've heard you, and here's what the university is doing about it. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. I think smart and creative are the perfect words to describe this. And so just wanted to make a positive comment and express my appreciation for this and excitement for delivering students at Rochester who have been experiencing some challenges with housing, an opportunity that is smart and is also growth minded, given some of the bed space conversation and alignment with the strategic plan. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Hipsch.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Couple questions. So the total cost is $4 million about per year. Divided by the 403 beds, that's about just over $10,000 per bed. And Rochester's just on fire in terms of enrollment and expansion and everything. What would that cost? The first part of my question is, what would that cost if we own the facility? And because after 12 years, we're going to be faced with not owning a facility, okay? So what would that cost if we owned it? First, so we can kind of do a price comparison versus leasing. And secondly, this gets us in faster, right? So we got to plan out for 6 more years down the road where we're, and secondly, we're kind of at their discretion on the food part of the meals part of it, because we negotiated with them on the food price. Has that been negotiated yet? Are we a captive audience on that? So thank you.
Assistant Vice President Krieger, that sounds like those are both aimed at you. So,
Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Hipsch. To your first question in terms of the cost per bed and what it would cost in terms of comparison, the way the cost structure is set up is a combination of room and board rates and recreational fees. And so I did not bring the detailed pro forma with me today that the CFO for UMR has worked with the system finance officer on. But what we've done is broken that out between room and board rates, as well as the recreational fees, which are spread across the broader UMR campus community. And so I believe it's $9,000 per bed is what we were aiming for on an annual basis. And again, with just a 1.75% rental increase over the term of the lease, which is, we've been not just thinking about the initial cost but also that maintaining a low cost throughout the term of the lease. I will say that, we worked hard to keep it at that $9,000 per bed rate as the initial term but it's also looking at that in the context of the larger Rochester housing availability and rates downtown. When we did, and that was essentially about the same as what we were looking at when we were looking at the public-private partnership that we had explored a couple of years ago, just at the beginning of the pandemic, that we ended up not proceeding with because of our partner in that, the YMCA, not being able to come to a financial conclusion that worked for them. And so recognizing also that we've had a 20% increase in inflation rates for construction projects over the last year, this is really a strategic decision to look at using the leasing opportunities at this to mitigate that long-term risk as it relates to the cost of construction and what we would have to do if we were constructing our own facility at this point in time. So it is a balancing issue in terms of risk. And then the timing piece is critical because when we were looking at the options of whether should we be looking again at building ourselves or this leasing opportunity, timing was also of the essence, and being able to get into, being able to provide students with housing opportunities in 2023 rather than 2024 or 2025 was critical for us as well. And then your next question was related to the dining contract. And in answer to that, that has not yet been negotiated. The landlord has experience with providing these types of dining services. And the landlord, as we've noted, is our longtime landlord at University Square. We have a very longstanding and supportive relationship with that landlord. And yes, we are a captive audience, and we do have that out in terms of being able to exercise, if we can't come to an agreement with the landlord, be able to exercise the option to lease the kitchen and servery facilities so that we can so we could go out for our own contract with a dining service provider. And so we do have that out, and that's how we're mitigating that risk in case we can't come to an agreement. But we are pretty confident that we'll be able to work with our landlord, who has been a really wonderful landlord for a very long time at University Square.
Quick follow-up, Regent Hipsch.
Follow-up comment. Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking in terms of, I'm for this, okay, we need it, right? Going forward, I'm wondering if the foundation could get involved somehow in providing that type of a real estate lease to, it's an obligatory lease, so it'd be a no-brainer for them in the real estate arm if they could get into some of that for us. So since we're
Gateway South, huh?
What's that?
I said Gateway South, huh?
Yeah. Right.
In jest. So thank you, Regent Hipsch. Thanks for those thoughtful and comprehensive answers, Assistant Vice President Krieger. On to Regent Powell, then Rosha, and then Kenyanya.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Assistant VP and Chancellor. So you commented on, Mayo will, kind of help us in the early years filling the gap. Would you elaborate a little bit more on how that works? Do we give them an allocation, and it sounds like we do have a history here. We know they're a really good partner, but I think reassure us a little bit about and inform us on how that will work.
Sure.
Chancellor Carroll.
Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Powell. Our history is that when the university launched, 318 was used primarily by partners in the area for housing. The housing is beautiful. Perhaps you've been there, apartment style, granite countertops. I asked if I could live there. They said no, but it has been long lasting and well kept. And these apartments being available again for residents at Mayo Clinic, for other students in education programs at Mayo Clinic and in other parts, the demand for affordable housing downtown is great. And we have regular requests related to our capacity. At present, there is no capacity. But I think I really feel, based on the history of this campus and how Chancellor Lim Cole began the housing program in cooperation with partners in Rochester, and how that functioned floor by floor, and how we have now taken all of the floors, that pressure has only grown for others to need housing. And so we think that it is viable to project that we'll be able to fill many of those apartments as needed in these first few years. Of course, our goal is to fill all of those apartments and all of these new rooms with UMR students. We intend to grow, and the workforce shortages are so great in healthcare that we think it's in service to the state and the mission of this university to grow. So I would reassure you that this is realistic to pursue, and yet, of course, there is risk. One more comment is that there could only be the right number of beds for one day, right? And so if we took on more housing to meet our precise needs as we project them for fall 23, we'd be right back here saying, what will be our solution to housing? Because we will continue to grow. And so to build in additional capacity is also prudent. And I think we have a mitigation strategy in place.
Thank you.
Good. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm enthused about this project. I just want to make just a couple bullet points in moving toward it. Minnesota sends 2,000 more students out of the state than it currently brings into the state for higher education. The more students we have at UMR, we reduce the cost of administration and other things per student, both on campus and as a system. And we have the Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota as healthcare superstars. So I'm pleased to see this moving forward. I shared the interest of Regent Hipsch. I like to see the university, if we can actually start to have some possession of facilities, but under the circumstances, there's a huge advantage to moving into this arrangement. And I look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Regent Rocha. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think you read my mind in inviting the Chancellor up, because I do think linking the vision with the real estate transaction is very helpful. I mean, it's the right conversation to have. I want to mourn the death of the Bluff Top plan. I was a fan of the boldest, plan and the metaphor you laid out there. But I mean, I think we're talking about the same things. When I heard about living with the non-UMR students, I mean, at first I was like, okay, there's a risk there, but hearing that it's not just open-ended, these are people from Mayo and a trusted partner, and we've done it before, apparently. I mean, I think that's a really good way to mitigate the capacity that will be there at the beginning. My comment is related to Regent Hipsch's comment about the conversation between leasing and building. And I mean, I think when the campus was first opened, that probably made a lot of sense, right? And that it was a bit of a venture, right? I mean, no one really knew how it would play out. Luckily, it's been very successful, and I mean, I imagine construction is a risk if you're not really sure if you'll need it. But I mean, we're in Rochester to stay. I don't know if that's a statement or a question. I think it's a statement. So, with that in mind, it seems that maybe it may be appropriate to, as Regent Rocha just pointed out, really start thinking about owning it. Because, I mean, is it 12 years? Or we're going to renew. I mean, we're going to have even more demand, right? So, but for the reasons stated, maybe now's not the right time. But if demand does require then a third property, I think it may make sense to really start thinking about owning that. Not a question, a comment, but if there's a response, I'd enjoy it.
Yes, Chancellor Carroll.
Vice Chair McMillan, Regent Kenyanya, thank you for the comment. And just to repeat that the Rochester campus is slated for our comprehensive campus review in 2023. And so I think as we look at the whole of the history and the future and plan facilities that with the land ownership and the lease strategy and partner strategy so far, that there'll be a lot to talk about.
Okay. Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I would
Regent
just-
Kenyanya.
remind the chancellor that if she enrolled, I'd make sure they'd let her live in in one of those units with the granite countertops. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Regent Kenyanya. So, our friend and colleague, Dr. Regent Ruth Johnson is suffering from significant laryngitis. So, assuming I don't violate any Robert's Rules of Order here, and it is my birthday, so give me a break. I'm going to read her comment that she just wrote, and so she has a lot to add on this. Is that right? Yeah, that's how you want me to do this?
Yes.
Very good. So as a longtime resident of Minnesota, I affirm that both the specifics regarding this property, resident rooms, meeting rooms, recreational facilities, pool, dining, and the location, literally across the street from UMR Galleria, is an excellent opportunity and one that I strongly support. Thank you. Thank you, Regent Johnson.
Thank you.
So with that, I believe that Mr. Langworthy, did you say there was a request for a roll call?
Yes, Regent Rosha.
Okay, so will you read the roll? Call the roll.
On the real estate transaction, Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Farnsworth. Yes. Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Hipsch.
Yes.
Regent Hipsch votes yes. Regent Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Johnson votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rosha.
Yes.
Regent Rosha votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent Talurabe.
Yes.
Regent Talurabe votes yes. Regent Verhalen.
Yes.
Regent Verhalen votes yes. Chair Mayron is absent. Vice Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Vice Chair McMillan votes yes.
That looks like an 11 votes in favor and 0 opposed, so that carries. And we are now
Thank you.
ready to, well, what we're supposed to do next, but I'm never going to hear the end of this from Regent Swigum, is take a break, but we don't have time for a break. So as you'll recall from my 2 years of chairing this committee, we never got a break, and you're not gonna, we're gonna keep plowing ahead. If you need to take a break yourselves, please do, but we really need to keep moving because we've got important lunchtime business as well. So that brings up the item 4, the 2025 Impact Capital Financing Program. And I'm going to turn to Senior Vice President Franz, and I believe there he is, Associate Vice President Volna at the table, to give us an intro and contexting of this, and then I think Vice President Volna will walk through the specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. You will recall that the board authorized the university to issue $500 million of bonds for the new capital financing program, and asked and required that the administration come to the board with recommendations for governance and oversight of that program in June of 2022. Well, it is June of 2022, and today we bring you for your review our recommendations for governance, oversight, and accountability of the program. We're calling this the Impact 2025 Capital Financing Program. Now, our recommendations that you're going to hear today are based on advice and consultation with Janie Montgomery Scott, our debt advisor. And they have deep expertise in this area. And also, Associate Vice President Volna has also worked with the best practices around universities in the country that have similar programs to make sure what we're doing it conforms to best practice. Now, the recommendations provide accountability and oversight for 3 key elements of the program. Number 1, how to manage the proceeds for the bonds that were sold in April. Number 2, the principal repayment reserve. And number 3, the internal lending program. Our recommendations have been incorporated as amendments to the Board of Regents policy debt transactions. Now, the draft amended policy is in your board materials. The recommendations include new reservations of authority by the board, as well as some new delegations to the president. We are also recommending that the administration provide annual reporting to the board for oversight and monitoring key metrics of the program. I need to say also that I want to thank the leadership from General Counsel Doug Peterson's office, Ray Lynn Lee, and from our office, Associate Vice President Mike Volda and his team, along with the able assistance of Jason Langworthy from the board office, to integrate this recommendation into, so that it conforms and is integrated into the existing board policy to make it consistent with the way we manage debt in general. So thank you to that team for putting this together. And if no further ado, we'll turn it over to Associate Vice President Mike Volna. Mr. Chair.
AVP Volna, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair McMillan, members of the board, the committee. I'm not going to repeat what Senior Vice President Franz said. I'll direct you instead to the materials in your board packet. I did provide some detailed explanations, which I'll just touch on a little bit, and the policy itself as drafted is in the materials. What we try to do is align this policy with, whenever possible, with existing policies that the board already has or with existing requirements that are already in board policy. The policy draft that you have therefore is really based on the existing Board of Regents policy, debt transactions. What we have recommended is to break that policy into 3 parts. So you have now a policy draft that has 3 articles. The first article really focuses on the scope of what's in the policy, what applies where. The second article really refers to the existing debt policy on debt transactions and would continue to apply in cases where we go out and issue long-term debt in the markets like we've traditionally done. The main changes there are definitions and things that need to be incorporated to refer to the fact that we have 3 articles now. The bulk of the recommendations related to this particular new program are in Article 3. And so what I will do now is I will just quickly walk through those aspects of Article 3 that have the recommendations. With respect to the bond proceeds, so just for kind of your recollection, we issued the debt, we received the proceeds, we're ready to start, at some point we'll be ready to start using those for financing projects in the 6-year plan. The board was very clear that you wanted to have a framework in place. And so with respect to the proceeds, what we're recommending is that the board reserve unto itself the authority to use bond proceeds consistent with current thresholds in place for capital project approval and for purchasing approval. By that, we mean projects greater than $1 million. What we're recommending is that the board delegate to the president or his or her delegee the authority to use bond proceeds for paying costs of issuance on interest-only bonds, use of investment proceeds to pay for external interest expense or investment manager fees while those funds are invested, and to use those bond proceeds for capital projects not requiring board approval. And finally, what we're recommending is that the board, with respect to the proceeds, that the board receive some annual reporting on some of the key metrics. So with respect to the proceeds that are still invested, what we're recommending is that you receive information on the investment performance for the past year, the market value of those investments, and how much is remaining and available for use. With respect to the allocation of how the proceeds have been used in the past year, we're recommending that the board receive a summary of information on the proceeds that have been allocated to capital projects, including those that you approved, as well as those that you did not approve. In both cases, we're recommending that that information be folded into existing reports that the board requires, the annual asset management report and the annual capital financing and debt management report. With respect to the second element of the strategy, which is the internal lending program, we also have some recommendations. What we're recommending for the board to reserve unto itself is the ability to approve loans for financing capital projects with the internal loans. Now, just to remind you, once we allocate the proceeds and units start paying it back and we start collecting it, we will now have money to relend. And so this really refers to the relending activities as opposed to the initial allocation of the proceeds. So as I said, we're recommending that the board reserve unto itself the authority to approve internal loans for capital projects consistent with the $1 million or greater threshold. We're also recommending that the board reserve unto itself the authority to use internal loan proceeds for any purpose other than capital financing. And again, that sort of mirrors and is consistent with what's currently in board policy relative to the issuance and use of debt proceeds. With respect to the delegations, we're recommending that the board delegate to the president or his or her delegee approval for internal loans not requiring board approval, which would include things like structuring of the repayment plan, interest rates and things like that, and general oversight of the program. And by that, what we mean is management of the program, management of the proceeds of the loan funds as we're waiting to relend them, the establishment of administrative policies and procedures and so forth. Finally, what we're recommending with respect to the internal loan program in terms of reporting is that the administration provide to the board annual reporting on the internal lending program. So for example, loans made throughout the year, what the beginning balance was at the beginning of the year, loan amounts collected from units, what's available for lending and so forth. And again, we would recommend that this be included in the annual capital financing and debt management report, which is already required. And finally, the third piece of the strategy that you all heard about and approved was the principal repayment amount. And it's important to just note that initially when we talked to you about that, this was in the context of a century bond, so a 100-year bond. We did not issue 100-year bonds, but we believe it is still the right strategy to put aside a reserve, to treat it like a reserve if it were a century bond, and let it grow, because it will, as over time, give us options, future boards and future administrations, options on whether or not we roll bonds or we pay them off or you use that for something else. So we still think it's a great strategy. Because this has to be in as tight a lockbox as possible, we really are recommending two things be reserved by the board. One is that you approve the amount and source of that principal repayment reserve, which you will, when you approve this at a future meeting, we will also provide that recommendation for the amount and where it's coming from. And then we recommend that the board reserve unto itself the authority to use the principal repayment reserve for any purpose. So it could be in the future for repayment of the bonds. It could be for something else, whatever it is, because we want a tight lockbox. The board would reserve unto itself the authority to approve those reserve amounts for any purpose. With respect to delegation, the strategy will be that the reserve will be invested in the endowment as a quasi-endowment. There is already board policy that governs the investment strategy and the allocation of the endowment. So we're not recommending any additional delegations to the administration. We believe current policy allows us to invest that, manage it over time. So then the final aspect of our recommendation with respect to the reserve is the reporting. And what we are recommending is that annually you receive a summary of the market value of the reserve, what its investment performance has been for the last year, and what its growth is relative to our original assumptions about what it would need to grow at. So that really is a summary of the recommendations that we're making. The recommendations were intended to be structured so that it could apply to future debt issuances that would fit this program as well. And so we hope that it provides that continuity and flexibility. The last thing I would say is that in Article 3, Section 2 deals with guidelines, and those really do represent guidelines that and context for future boards and administrations over what is supposed to happen. It is also the information that rating agencies would like to see about the intent for the program. So with that, I'll end my remarks and my overview of the recommendations and available for questions.
Thank you, AVP Volna. Nice summary of complicated high finance items. And I'll just note that the board and the committee greatly appreciate your close work with board staff and Mr. Langworthy and Mr. Steve's team. So They understand our policies better than we do most days, and integrating new stuff into it is best done with an expert like the one to my right here. So I know you did that, and I'm grateful. So.
Yeah, immediate right, I think you mean, Mr. Chair.
Immediate right. I see that so discussion on this topic, and we'll start with Regent Rocha.
Speaking of non-experts, Mr. Chair, thank you, Vice President Volna, Senior Vice President Franz. I think this is, very helpful to get some clarity on these. My questions go to the, sort of the, the policy enterprise of, we have other restrictions on dollar amounts, reservations to the board and so on. And I'm just kind of curious as when, particularly like on a subdivision 4A, do we have an idea of what kind of dollar amounts we're dealing with? Because certainly for me, anything that would be under our current reservation thresholds wouldn't be any issue to provide this, other than the fact I know there have been other limitations when it comes to investments, right, that have been reserved to the board. This, I think, is a sensible way of providing this opportunity to the administration to move forward on these things without having to either call a board meeting or wait for a board meeting. But can you just give us an idea of sort of what the dollar amounts one would be looking at within this respect, and do those generally fall under our $1 million reservation rule in most contracts?
Associate Vice President Volna.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan and Regent Rocha. So are you referring to, when you say the dollar amounts, you're referring to the types of projects that would fall under your threshold, or are you referring to the 4A, the investment of the proceeds?
Mr. Chair, so the decision would ultimately, here would appear to be the proceeds, right? So, if the overall investment is billions of dollars, but the amount we're talking about in the proceeds is 100 grand, well, then that's not an issue because it's not getting at that $1 million threshold. So I'm less concerned about what the proceeds are off of and more concerned about how large the proceeds might be. Might they be substantially larger than what we've reserved on most contracts? And then in that situation, would they be subject to that reservation? Or is this, or would this be an exception to our general reservation of authority to the board?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So with respect to the investment of the proceeds, keep in mind that this is written right now with referring to the current bonds that we've issued. So the amount of the proceeds we're talking about right now is about $497 million. Okay, so the board is reserving to itself the authority to use those proceeds and allocate them to projects. What it is delegating to the board or to the administration is the authority to invest those proceeds until the board is ready to allocate them to projects. So we would be investing, as we are now, $497 million in proceeds in a manner that will allow us to use them when they are needed for the 6-year plan. In the future, if the board and the administration were to decide to enter into another debt transaction for, let's say, another $100 million, or to issue a century bond because the conditions are favorable, the amount of proceeds that would fall under this policy at that time would be whatever those proceeds are that we get out of that debt transaction. We would similarly invest those proceeds until such time as a future board decided they want to use it on future capital transactions.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So $500 million, how would that be decided now as to where those proceeds would be invested? Because I guess that I read that as being I didn't read it in that same vein, so I'm glad I asked the question. So right now, to invest that $500 million, would it require board approval as to how it's going to be invested?
AVP Volna, and as you think of that answer, I would just add to it. We did act last month to authorize you to make a temporary investment of that. If that's probably not you wouldn't use that term, but rather than have the money sit, we gave you authority to begin to invest it, and that's under our chief investment officer's watchful eye, I assume, already.
That is correct. Last month, the board did affirm the administration's ability and authority to invest those proceeds. And so Chief Investment Officer Stuart Mason has invested them in a relatively moderate risk strategy of laddered investments that are hold to maturity. And they're structured in a way that the maturities match what we anticipate the need will be through the 6-year plan. And that is the investment strategy that we would probably typically employ on any future investment of proceeds as well, because remember, we issue debt for capital projects. And so we want those proceeds to be available when we need them for capital projects.
Regent Rocha, I hijacked your question a little by bringing us back to last month, but I thought it might be helpful. So I want to return to you and make sure we're getting to the heart of your question here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, that was very helpful because it brought us back to the current process. I find a certain level of concern because what you just said is, what the term you used, it was very probably, I can't remember exactly what you said, but as far as being conservative, because that's a big deal. I mean, you talk about, let's say we decided we were going to go with, putting it all in crypto. Well, we'd be looking pretty rough right about now. So, that's a tremendous amount of money can be at impact, and therefore I'm a little bit concerned about turning that level of determination completely over, where $500 million could be invested in a specific way without the board at least having had a touch point to ensure that it's a level of risk that we as the public board are comfortable with.
AVP Volna, a little more clarity there around investment guidelines.
Sure, I can take a crack at it, and I think I have somebody over my shoulder who might want to come up as well. But so our thinking around the investment was that of the proceeds was that keep in mind there will be interest expense that is owed on these bonds, and so we wanted to invest them in a way that balanced risk with our ability to generate some return that would help us to pay that interest expense until we allocate the proceeds to capital projects. If you invest them in a risk-free return of, let's say, U.S. Treasuries, you will not generate enough money to cover the interest expense. And so what CIO Stuart Mason and his team have done is really developed a very high-quality bond portfolio that is structured to mature at various points over the next 5, 6, 7 years, that is timed to when we thought we would need the money based on the 6-year plan and the way that we typically spend money on capital projects. So it is invested in a very high quality laddered bond strategy that will mature at such times when we need it. That gives us an opportunity to generate enough income to help cover the interest expense. And the risk of loss is very low because it is a hold to maturity strategy. We're not playing the market on that.
Looks like you did a nice job with a highly structured laddered bond portfolio strategy, whatever you say. So I'm kidding. That is consequential stuff, and I appreciate Regent Rocha's line of inquiry here. It's a lot of money, but in the world of Stuart Mason and his shop, they manage $2.2 billion, I think, right now in the consolidated endowment fund already. So it's big money, and it's in good hands. I can say that from my time on the advisory committee there. So Regent Rocha, I will come back to you if you want, but right now I'm going to turn to Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. And to Regent Rocha's question, which is a good one, thank you. I guess my assumption is that that money will be managed within the same governance and portfolio requirements that Stuart manages the rest of the consolidated endowment fund around. I mean, in other words, and there's plenty of guidance and control there. And so that's my assumption, but I think we should, to Regent Rocha's question, we should hear your answer.
AVP Mason, welcome to the committee, and why don't you talk to us a little about your investment guidelines and how you manage very large sums of money right now?
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to Regent Powell's and Regent Rocha's questions. The resolution that was passed at the last board meeting a month ago directed our office to invest the proceeds under existing investment guidelines. So to your point, Regent McMillan or Vice Chair McMillan, we manage almost $2.5 billion in the endowment, another $1.8 billion in the working capital account, and in addition to that, another couple of $100 million in other university reserve pools. Each has a specific set of rules and guidelines that's hardwired in region policy. And we were directed last month to use those same policy guidelines in the investment processes for the 500 or the $497 million. As AVP Volna has very adequately described, they are currently invested in a program that is designed to generate sufficient interest income. It's all in high grade, relatively high grade fixed income securities managed by 4 outside professional fixed income managers. And the program is designed to generate approximately the 20 million or just in excess of $20 million annually in interest that will be required to pay the interest on the $500 million of bonds. So we are required to pay $20,240,000 annually in interest on those bonds. And our investment program is designed to offset that. As proceeds are used in capital projects over the course of the next 6 years, by virtue of the 6-year plan, obviously the pool of capital we are investing will be reduced. And the interest that we are earning will also be reduced, but it will be supplemented from interest that will be received by the departments who are putting the capital to use. So the combination of earned interest on the bond proceeds account and the interest received from departments on the money that they have received for their capital projects is designed to also produce the $20 million of bond interest over the course of the life of the program.
Excellent. Thank you for that added clarity. Back to Regent Rocha. Anything further follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and maybe this is just, I'm not fully comprehending how the policy lays out, but is that to suggest then that the language that says consistent with board policies, that those guardrails would remain that are already in place? And then the second question is, our approval last month, after adopting this language, would that have been required? Or would the administration have been able to move forward without asking the board to approve it as we did at the last meeting?
AVP Volna.
Well, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but my feeling is that had this policy been in place, we would not have needed the resolution or the motion last month to affirm the administration's authority to invest the proceeds, because this would clearly delegate our authority to invest the proceeds.
And Mr. Chair,
yes, Regent Rocha.
Thank you. I know it's getting kind of down in the weeds here, but so I'm not sure what the guardrails are then at that point. Because that sort of implies that almost a wide open enterprise. And maybe we can talk, this is up for review, correct? So we can possibly have a little bit more individual dialogue if necessary, but that's one concern I have, is that it's, when you start talking about that amount of money, it's very, very important to the future of the institution. So thank you.
It is up for review, and I need to keep us moving here, but I don't want to cut others off. If others have questions, you want to get in play. All right, we move on, and next is the new item on the agenda, or the item that we advanced onto the agenda today, and that's an update on Twin Cities campus public safety. And with us to provide the update is our president, of course, our senior vice president, and Chief Clark, as well as General Counsel Peterson. And I think we're going to have Chief Clark and General, he'll come to the table if we need, because there's lots of legal issues here as well. But before I ask President Gable to provide opening context for this, Chief Clark, I just want to say on behalf of myself, and I believe the members of the board, your team is deeply appreciated, and I'm sure pretty badly overworked and pretty significantly understaffed. And issues never seem to get easier. They only get harder for you and your team, but please know that we appreciate that greatly. And with that, I'm going to turn to President Gable.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan, members of the committee. So as we start this conversation today, we all know that across the country, the last few years have been extraordinarily challenging in a variety of ways to our health, to our sense of belonging, and apropos to our conversation this morning, to our safety. Crime is up across the country, and the Twin Cities is not immune from these public safety challenges and trends. We're also facing alarming shortages of available police officers, which has been widely reported nationally and certainly here in Minneapolis. So we've invested and increased that investment in UMPD. We have worked on hiring, we have expanded our patrols, but this shortage affects the whole city, including the off-campus areas adjacent to our Minneapolis campus, which are under the jurisdiction of the Minneapolis Police Department. I know many people listening today get very frustrated when we say that there are jurisdictional challenges, but I want everyone listening to know that we acknowledge those jurisdictional challenges so that our community understands our range of options and where those options are constrained. But those constraints do not change the fact that all of us take very seriously and care very deeply about the presence of our community members in those neighborhoods and their safety. We share the frustration and concern about crime in general all across the country, and certainly crime in our adjacent neighborhoods. My own children are college age. One is a student who lives and studies in a metropolitan area very much like ours. The other works on a university campus in a metropolitan area just like ours. I get their safety alerts. I get our safety alerts. My heart sinks every time. I am alarmed and concerned just like all of us. And I want to express on behalf of everyone at the university that the administration wants nothing more than to address this challenge and bring crime down. Members of the committee, we have made specific and strategic steps and decisions to address this national challenge and local problem, including work to hire new officers, hiring safety ambassadors, social workers, and community liaisons. We've installed blue light kiosks, enhanced lighting, acquired the Rave Escort app, provided additional patrols in these off-campus areas with our own officers while working collaboratively with Minneapolis Police Department, Hennepin Sheriff's Office, and others. We've done so without losing sight of the expectations and values of our campus community, as you heard articulated so well during the MSAFE presentation. And I want to thank them for the work that they did. That MSAFE work included UMPD. And I want to especially acknowledge Chief Clark and his team and add my thanks that Vice Chair McMillan expressed on behalf of the board for everything that they do in this very unique and incredibly challenging time. So today you'll hear on how we've increased our investment, how we are focusing our strategy around safety, what we're looking at for UMPD and their officer pool, and then in the tools available to that pool and to all of us to address the challenges in our adjacent neighborhoods. You'll also hear about how we have worked collaboratively with the Minneapolis Police Department, which we have always done, and other agencies on shared patrols and investigations. That will be part of the presentation today too. So members of the committee, we work every day as a team on campus and with law enforcement across the community to consider and implement steps and solutions. We work in shared governance on campus with our newly formed Campus Safety Committee to ensure that we do so in alignment with our values. And so today I'm joined by members of our team, Senior Vice President Myron Franz, UMPD Chief Matt Clark, and General Counsel Doug Peterson to discuss in detail public safety issues. We will focus, as you've asked us to, on what is called the student co-op property at 1721 University Avenue and the steps the university has taken through the courts and otherwise in coordination with local law enforcement to respond. And so at this time, Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to turn it over to the team to continue the presentation.
Very good. And that team begins with you, Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the community. Thank you, President Gable. First, I want to also reiterate that the safety of our students, faculty and staff and visitors is our top priority. I also want to express, like President Gable, on behalf of the university, our shock and outrage with the criminal activity that has occurred at that property located at 1721 University Avenue Southeast. Let me assure you, we are doing everything we can to ensure that this property is no longer a haven for the people who are responsible for dangerous behavior in our community. And this morning, I want to provide you with more information about this property and describe what steps the university has taken and will take to address this situation. Chief Clark of the University of Minnesota Police Department will provide additional information about the responses from the Minneapolis Police Department, from the UMPD and our local partners, including the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department and others to work daily in protecting our community. But I want to remind this board and all those listening that after the murder of George Floyd, we made two decisions regarding the Minneapolis Police Department. We stopped using Minneapolis Police Department officers for off-duty events like football games, and we said we would no longer use MPD specialized services like bomb sniffing K9 units. We have always said we would cooperate daily and in every way with the MPD and in the jurisdiction that they serve in protecting our community. Now, we all know that the Twin Cities campus of the University of Minnesota is situated between a number of different neighborhoods within the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. There are thousands of private residences and businesses within these communities. We support our local communities, and collectively we try to provide a place for our students, faculty, and staff to live and work together. But the safety of this community has been threatened recently by the people who have taken over this property, or who took over this property for their own use. And those purposes run counter to the safety of our community. You see on the screen a map of the affected area. It shows the neighborhood where 1721 University Avenue is located. You will see University Avenue Southeast and 4th Street Southeast running parallel on the buildings surrounding the university property. The dark colored or darker colored tan buildings are university owned properties. The light blue parcels are the privately owned buildings in the area, and the dark blue parcel is 1721 University Avenue. The property is located in the historic Greek housing district that is along the street of right across the street from University Armory. The details that I will describe provide more background for everyone, but I repeat, the forward action of the university is to seek pathways for our local partners to stop this dangerous behavior occurring at this property in the future, and to seek ways to permanently change the use of this property for the benefit and the safety of the community. So let me describe a little bit more of the 1721 University Avenue Southeast property. The building is not owned or affiliated with the university and is not located on university property. The building is owned, as President Gable mentioned, by the Students Cooperative, Inc. This organization is a cooperative established to provide affordable housing. Currently, there are 4 co-op board members that govern the co-op. The property has been used as a cooperative since the 1940s. Although the name of the entity is the Students Cooperative, this house is not limited only to students. And in fact, there were no students living in the property for the last several months at least. The Students Cooperative is not a registered student organization. It is not a fraternity or sorority, and it does not have any current university affiliation. Let me describe a little bit about what we've done to address the issues at the problem property. In February, the university contacted the property owners to request the owners remove graffiti from their buildings. And at that time, we also asked them about their intentions for the building given its current state of disrepair. The university continued to be in contact with the co-op board throughout the spring regarding the state of the building and our obvious safety concerns. Now, the week of May 23, UMPD installed a camera trailer across from the property and stationed a light trailer in the back of the building. We have been sharing our camera and other intelligence with the city of Minneapolis, Minneapolis Police Department, Hennepin County, and other partners. On May 23, the university attorneys contacted the attorney representing the co-op board and demanded the board evict the squatters, hire outside security company to control building access and activity, and to secure the building against subsequent usage by non-residents. The co-op board, however, indicated they had lost control of the property and that they had started an eviction process in Hennepin County to file notice on the individuals that were living and remained in the building. Now, beyond the eviction, the board indicated they had few funds, if any, for the other actions that the university demanded regarding safety and conditions of the property. As we all know, eviction of residents is governed by local law, and in this case, Hennepin County, and there's a specific process that must be followed. As part of that process, on June 1st, the cooperative received a writ of removal from a Hennepin County district judge. The court provided the writ of that to the sheriff's office for the sheriff to serve on the residents of that property. On Friday, June 3rd, the Hennepin County Sheriff delivered the writ of removal on the property to the occupants. The law requires a 24-hour notice before individuals on a property can then be evicted legally. That Friday evening, dangerous criminal and illegal activity took place around the property, including the firing of guns. I will let Chief Clark speak more about these activities in a moment. On Saturday, June 4th, the remaining occupants were evicted and the property was boarded up. The university contracted and is paying to have 24/7 private security at the site. We have communicated our expectation to the co-op board that they will take over maintaining security of the property as soon as possible within 30 days at the latest. But let me talk a little bit about next steps. Again, safety is our top priority here, and right now there is no access to the building. We are continuing to have UMPD patrol the area on a regular basis throughout the day, and we are to make sure that no tampering or access has occurred in gaining access to that building. I will note that we, as President Gable noted, we have limited UMPD resources. Patrolling this area takes time away from patrols on campus property and other areas surrounding the campus, and requires officers to work overtime, which many of them continue to do, and thank you to them. But until the co-op board takes over security of the property, the university will continue to provide additional security as needed and as determined in collaboration with our local partners, including the city of Minneapolis. So next, we're trying to develop plans for the future of the property. The property is in disrepair, and we have little confidence that the co-op has the funds to renovate the property in the foreseeable future. We understand the city of Minneapolis inspectors will, in the near future, be in the building due to concerns about the condition of the structure. Although the condemnation decision rests with the city, we have urged and we will continue to argue that the building be condemned. The university will work towards control of that building. We will object by any lawful means available to us to make sure the building does not sit vacant for years while the co-op board considers the situation. We will work with the co-op board, should they choose so, to find an alternative buyer. There are fraternities and sororities who do not have housing and would welcome a chance to engage in a conversation regarding this property. We have a meeting scheduled with leaders and members from the Greek organizations and that have locations near this property to discuss and coordinate our next steps for the future of this property. We have contacted residents and representatives of the neighboring properties and are planning to meet with all the neighbors near this property to ensure they know our plans and intentions to keep the area safe. Of importance, we need to note that the University of Minnesota Foundation Real Estate Advisors have a loan through the Greek loan program to the co-op. Now, the loan was issued in August of 2018 in the amount of $100,000 to be repaid over 15 years. The co-op is current on their payments. But this loan has a provision that requires the property be kept in good condition, repair, and operating condition free from any waste or misuse, and will comply with all requirements of law, municipal ordinances, and regulations, and will promptly repair or restore any building, improvements, or structures now or hereafter located on the land which may become damaged or destroyed to their condition prior to such any damage or destruction. We have requested UMFREA, the organization I just mentioned, to provide notice to Students Cooperative that they are in default of their mortgage as a result of a variety of property conditions and related legal requirements. Once UMFREA issues a notice of default, and if not timely cured, UMFREA could then foreclose proceedings, which would likely take at least 9 months. We're also convening a meeting of the approval committee for the Safe House for Greek Student Chapters Loan Fund to review next steps regarding that loan and future loans, including the potential foreclosure of this property. We will encourage the co-op board to work with us to move this property to responsible ownership that will ensure this condition is not replicated ever. We will oppose any attempt by the co-op board to continue to hold their lodging license with the city of Minneapolis. Let me just summarize by saying that this co-op has allowed an unsafe situation to endanger our community. The co-op has failed to manage the property, control the residents of the property, and respond to security concerns. We will continue to explore and use every tool possible to get control of the property and work with the community on a plan for the future of 1721 University Avenue. We'll clearly work with our community partners to change this situation on a permanent basis going forward. Finally, before I ask Chief Clark to add his perspective on this particular property, I want to acknowledge the tremendous job as Vice Chair McMillan and President Gable have on the Department of Public Safety and what the work they're doing overall. Our department includes the University of Minnesota Police Department, the Public Safety Emergency Communications Center, the Security Data and Access Team, the Security Team, and our Engagement Team. We know that the police forces around this nation and in the state and in the city are challenged. Our own UMPD are facing many challenges with respect to resources. One of our biggest challenges is that our team is doing more with less. Despite our efforts to recruit and retain, we have about 20% of UMD positions open. We've authorized overtime, and I sincerely appreciate that many officers are putting in that extra hours to keep us safe. And our entire Department of Public Safety, I applaud their dedication and efforts over the last several years. You heard President Gable mention a few of our safety initiatives that we continue to deploy to work on providing a safe campus community. We plan at the next board meeting in July to provide an update to the board about our overall public safety planning for the next academic year, give more details about our plans going forward. And with that, Vice Chair McMillan, I'd ask the Chief Clark to present his comments.
Thank you, Chief Clark. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, Regents, thank you for having me. Just want to thank the President, President Gable, and Senior Vice President Franz. They've been supportive and been actively engaged in this address and all the activity that's gone on, and appreciate their support in handling the address. I'll give you first a list of items that we were working on the address. First being that we had physical security assigned to the location, lighting, and a camera. We're monitoring it actively with our 911 center. We had MPD involved in additional patrols, even though they're very limited. They were watching the address as well. We had assigned officers that night to that location. We had an investigator liaison assigned to Minneapolis to work on the address and specific crime issues that had been generated from the address. Also, we worked with our government relations and city inspectors to try to get some activity from the city side on inspections. And finally, worked directly with the Hennepin County Courts and Hennepin County Sheriff's Office on the eviction process to ensure that at any time when that process was worked through the courts, that the eviction would occur. On this particular night, we had 2 officers assigned to the address along with the camera monitoring. Those officers were called away about half a block to deal with a related issue at a sorority. At that time, about 200 to 300 individuals were in that block, and there were multiple shots fired from different firearms and different individuals. About 50 casings were recovered near the address, and a 15-year-old boy was shot in the leg. UMPD officers arrived. They applied a combat tourniquet to that individual, had to clear the area and wait a number of minutes before the ambulance would be authorized to arrive with the number of gunshots that were going on. Along with Minneapolis Police Department, the address was secured. Minneapolis homicide investigators secured a search warrant for the address, which took several hours. UMPD and Minneapolis police officers cleared the address and then boarded the address up by about 5 o'clock in the morning. I contacted Major Jeff Storms from Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. He assigned 4 deputies to go to the address, contact the owner, and then they turned the ownership of that address over to the owner the following morning at 10 o'clock. With that, as Senior Vice President Franz had stated, we have additional security assigned to the address for the next 10 days. We're working with the board that owns that address to ensure that they have some type of security when our security ends, and we do have officers assigned at night to the address, along with the additional camera and lighting that is at the front and back of the address.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all 3 of you. And I think we've probably got some board interest in discussion, so I'm going to open it up for that now and start with my colleague, Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Vice Chair McMillan. And I want to thank everyone for the presentation today. And thanks to board leadership and committee leadership for adding this agenda item, because I really can't or don't think we can understate the impact of having these conversations and updates publicly. I also want to echo the Vice Chair's thanks to Chief Clark and the whole team at UMPD and the Department of Public Safety for the increasingly intense and comprehensive work that you're doing under difficult environmental circumstances and staffing and workforce and everything the Vice Chair said. So thank you for that. I think my first question may be a question involving General Counsel Peterson around the legal relationship between the university and the Students Cooperative. I think Senior Vice President Franz, you just addressed this, but I think this is one point that would be behoove us to be really clear about in this venue for the public watching. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, because in a lot of the email correspondence we've received and in other places, our entity, the Regents of the University of Minnesota, Dinikin Housing, seems to be listed in some sort of mortgage documents or some sort of other real estate related documents with the Students Cooperative. So I was familiar with the Greek loan piece, and I just want to be clear that those mortgage documents and other documents that people keep finding with our entity on it is strictly related to that Greek loan piece that you just talked about. So that's my first question.
SVP Franz, do you want to handle that, or would you call on our general counsel?
I think it'd be good to have General Counsel Peterson come up. I will just start the response, Mr. Chair, and just mention that you are correct in your assumption that the nature of the university connection with the 1721 University is that mortgage, the loan that was taken out, and General Counsel Peterson can give you more details about that.
Welcome, General Counsel Peterson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Good morning, everyone. Regent Farnsworth. As to 1721, you are correct, Regent Farnsworth. The Students Cooperative, Inc. is a legal entity with no connection to the University of Minnesota. As I understand it, in past times, there were students who resided at that address, but as I understand it, in sort of the recent relevant period, no students were occupying that property, particularly when speaking about, the last 2-3 months of, unlawful, unruly behavior at the address. As to the loan, it triggers a mortgage. It's an August 2018 loan. When you look at the mortgage document, the mortgagee, which is the other party to that legal relationship, is the Regents of the University of Minnesota. So that pertains to that $100,000 loan that was extended in August of 2018, with a judgment having been made at that time that even though this organization was not a Greek organization, it was, as I understand it, in that kind of row of properties such that Umfria and the parties to that loan program decided it would be beneficial to use that loan program to enhance the condition of that property in the same way that they use loans to enhance the other properties along that same address, which are also owned by separate legal entities, but primarily the frats and the sororities. The handling of that mortgage relationship is governed by a separate memorandum of understanding or program document that's an agreement between the University of Minnesota Foundation, the University of Minnesota, and this entity called Umfria, which is a subsidiary of the foundation. It's University of Minnesota Foundation Real Estate Advisors. And so any decisions with regard to the administration of that loan are governed by this approval committee, which has representatives from the 3 parties to that agreement. And with regard to, the potential now for foreclosure, because this entity clearly has lost control of this property is unfit, that trips some of the covenants within that loan document. They happen to be read as what are called kind of cross default provisions. So even though they are current in their loan payments, a breach of those covenants can trigger an obligation to have them kind of fully repay the full dollar amount if Umfria forecloses on that mortgage obligation. But the control of those decisions rests with Umfria as an entity, and it works through this three-party kind of approval committee to make those decisions. So I think, what's happened here puts to Umfria, the issue of proceeding with a foreclosure action. And I'm presuming here the city is, now that the property is safe to enter, the city is going to act promptly to move in, inspect that property, cite the property for all the public health violations. By the kind of the nature of the problems here, another issue that will be before the city when there's so many violations is the question whether they will condemn the property. And that ideally, from Umfria's point of view, would be an enhanced foundation for them to proceed with a foreclosure action on that mortgage, which, as I say, is the mortgage document is in the name of the University of Minnesota.
Thank you, General Counsel Peterson. Follow up, Regent Farnsworth.
Yes, two quick things. One, thank you, General Counsel Peterson, for that explanation. That was my understanding generally around the Greek loan program, and that's why we may be appearing there. But I thought that piece was very essential for us to kind of clarify for the broader public record, because I think there's been some confusion and maybe folks not understanding that, understandably so. So I really appreciate your a little bit more in-depth explanation of that. One more quick clarifying question, and then I'll make quick wrap-up comments. With the 24/7 private security, that was a new piece of information for me today. I think that's great. Really, really positive that we're doing that. And I actually saw that yesterday when I was in the area, so I was wondering what that was. But I just want to make sure for my notes, I heard that we're going to have it up to 30 days. But then I think Chief Clark said 10 days, and either I misheard that, or I just want to make sure that that piece is clarified as well.
Senior Vice President France.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, clearly, we're trying to do everything we can for the co-op to take responsibility for a building that they control and they own, and it's very frustrating, as you can imagine. The current agreement goes for 10 days. I mean, part of the concern, the reason you heard that is we want to make sure that there's not a gap that happens here, and we'll figure out how to deal with that. But it's expensive to provide a 24/7 security. But I think it's important to know that we will be assessing on a regular basis what are the current needs of that facility property going forward. So it's subject to on the ground facts as they change or don't change, frankly. But thank you for the question.
Great, and then Vice Chair, I'll just wrap up.
Yeah, wrap up, Regent Farnsworth.
Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. I'll wrap up just by saying really clearly and directly for the record that, this has been an issue that I've been tracking for a number of weeks, that there's been updates provided kind of internally to the board. And I wanna really strongly emphasize on behalf of myself that I think the team, whether it was UMPD, the administration, all the different university entities involved in this have done a really comprehensive job handling this property and all of the legal intricacies, the public safety intricacies, PR and university relation angles. This was a very complicated and difficult situation. And I think that we've been very methodical, plus the new information presented today. I feel positive about the direction we're headed. Of course, no one wants to be in a situation like this at all, but feel that we're addressing this comprehensively and look forward to closely monitoring next steps. The one suggestion I have is and not asking for a specific commitment on this, but I know particularly the parent community, balancing the realities of a large institutional operations in an urban environment and kind of, there's folks that can be louder voices on particular issues, understandably so. I think there are some concerns in the parent community of wanting some sort of parent forum or some hybrid in-person online option to engage, whether it's through the parent and family program or others or other venue. I think that's really important and it's something we really have to strongly consider. And just speaking on behalf of myself and whatever other entities, as a regent, that's something I would participate in as a listening session or whatnot. I think the parent community, there's a significant sector of the parent community that have other concerns that want them to be addressed in that kind of form. So thank you very much. I'll conclude my comments there.
All right, got several regents that want to speak. We'll go to Regent Swigum next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chief Clark, as most of us here, all of us, pass on our thanks to your team for what they do both on campus and off campus for the protection of our community. Thank them. Make sure they know that we appreciate it. Two questions specific. You may not be able to answer either one. And that's fine. If you can't answer them, that's fine. Last night I came on campus about 6:05 to go to a Humphrey School event over here at TCF, Huntington Bank. And at 6:05, I drove down University, right by the building, 1721. I thought it was boarded up, evicted, it'd be just dead, it'd be quiet there. There were 3 police cars in front at 6:05 with lights on. Any idea what was going on? Or is there anything you can share with me? I thought these last 3 residents were evicted. I thought it was boarded up, and here's 3 cop cars with their lights on.
Chief Clark.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure. I would have gotten notes last night if there was something related to the actual address. It might have been something on University. We spent a lot of time on University Avenue. It could be something unrelated, but I didn't get anything since I checked in this morning, and from last night, I usually would have gotten a call if there was something specific to the address.
Chief Clark, they could have been MPD cars. I didn't look close enough, but there were 3 cars with lights on right at 6:05. I was interested in that. Secondly, and maybe you cannot comment on this either in regards to who has lived in that facility. But I've been told by a very credible source, in fact, law enforcement, that the leader of this left-wing group, radical group, Antifa or Antifia or whatever, was housed there and resided there for quite a period of time during the last couple of years. Is that true, or is it something you can't comment on?
Chief Clark.
Regent Swigum, Mr. Chair, that is correct. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
All right, on to Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. And I'll add my thanks to your team, Chief Clark, and I hope they hear and understand the depth of support from the board for what they do. I have 3 questions. The first one is, to the degree that this location has been, whether you want to call it a magnet or a catalyst or whatever for criminal behavior, now that we have the eviction, that it has been sealed off, how do you assess it, as a continued, magnet for criminality? Is it, none, somewhere? I mean, how do you, once we've taken these actions, how should we think about it as a continuing threat? That's the first question. And then the second 2 questions, Senior Vice President Franz touched on, and it has to do with recruiting. And if you could make a few comments for how you're approaching the recruiting. We know it's difficult. We know everyone's down. Everyone's trying to recruit police. And if you just give us your thoughts on, how you're approaching that, what the prognosis is. And then lastly, when we last saw you, you expressed frustration, which we all really felt, I think, with, the justice system right now, which releases criminals so quickly after your team and others, have arrested them. We have a new U.S. Attorney Lugar, who's been very high profile, and, his remarks on, those days are over. And I'm just, wondering if you're seeing any change in how this justice system itself is approaching this criminality. So 3 of them.
Chief Clark, let's see, forward-looking, thinking about the property, recruiting officers, and the criminal justice system. He's delivered you a tall order there.
That's it.
All right, I'll start at the first one, Mr. Regent Powell and Mr. Chair. The continued threat, the ownership is now in the hands of the board. They need to do their job. I'm hopeful that the city will go through the residents, considering what I've heard and seen on body camera. There should be nobody occupying that residence for a very long time. If the board does their job and has the right renters in that property, there's a possibility that that could open back up. I think the university is much safer in going a different route with that address. Maybe we relocate that whole co-op in a different location, but I don't think they have the management ability to handle what they've done in the last 2 years. That's the example. So pretty much the city has to act. And at the same time, the university needs to play a strong part in influencing that. Like everything that we've done, whether it's Hennepin County, Minneapolis Police Department, city inspectors, we are partners with them and we're asking for their help. And I think that something that's very important for the university is to understand it's not a one-way street. We need to be good partners to them. They need to be good partners to us, and we'd have to have a track record of that. I'm very thankful Minneapolis stepped up along with Hennepin County to act immediately with us. If we didn't have that, I think it would be a different picture today than it is right now. In terms of recruitment, it kind of goes to what is the situation on crime. Frankly, our crime in off-campus areas is much different than on campus. Our on-campus crime is fairly steady. It has been for a number of years. I'm thankful for that. Off campus in 18 and 19, we saw violent crime levels at about 300 incidents per year. In 20 and 21, we see about 450 to 500 incidents off campus. So up about 45%. We think that's going to be about what we're at this year as well. What we've done, and I appreciate President Gable and Senior Vice President Franz and their support. We've assigned officers every night since last August to Dinkytown. We've had multiple officers assigned to different overtime events. We are stretched thin, we're down. When I talked to you last, we're at 56 officers. Now actively, we're at 48. We've had a lot of requests for escorts this year. I'm appreciative that people are using our escorts and our security services, but it's very hard to compete with the rising salaries of the security agencies across the metro. I would say that most disappointing is how some of the officers are being treated in the last 2 years. What you're seeing is that there's less than acrimonious activity from parts of the university. And it's disheartening. And I understand that the president and senior vice president and this board is very supportive, but if the university isn't, it's going to be very hard to retain officers. Because those officers, I know their families. I know that they are here for altruistic reasons. They believe in the university, but when they're not treated well, they won't stay. I had 4 young officers come on just recently, and all 3 of the 4 quit. And they cited the reasons of this environment. So I'll tell you this, it's very tough to see them go and talk to their families and understand that, but it's a tough environment to be in. What I'm going to do is focus on our services. 911 response, visible patrols, really good investigation. That means engagement in some of the other services. The things we should be doing that we're mandated and asked to do by many people at the university, we won't have the bodies to do that. We need to respond to 911 calls. We need to be available. I spent 3 days at the Big Ten Chiefs Conference, talking to the chiefs from all the other universities in the Big Ten. And for the most part, they were apologetic about the situation we're in. But one thing they had was full support from the top down at the university. And I appreciate the board and the president and the senior vice president and their support, but it has to be the entire university and the community. I've been to 2 St. Paul Police Department events for their retiring chief, and to see the support that that city has for those police officers when they know crime is up and there's less officers is amazing. And I've also seen what happened in Minneapolis and the toxic environment that those officers have to deal with, the ones that have decided to stay and how they're treated. So I'll ask the board, how are we treating the university officers? Are we going to treat them like Minneapolis? Or are we going to treat them like St. Paul? So when it comes to recruitment, that is the key. They're not here for the money. They're here because they believe in the university and they believe in serving. And finally, in terms of criminal justice system, I'm the head of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Board for Hennepin County. I meet with the judges, the corrections director. I meet with the prosecutor, meet with the public defender. We've been talking a lot, and we have 3 different subcommittees focused on the right solutions that prevent trauma, but at the same time hold people accountable. And I'm hopeful that those subcommittees and the people on them are going to fix the system. That's a big part of it, but it's really about the community and how they treat each other and how they treat their first responders and the people who serve them.
Thank you, Chief Clark. Nice job with a comprehensive and consequential set of questions there. We need to keep moving here, but I've got Regent Rocha and then Kenyanya, and I think I probably won't go around for second turns here. So let's give it to you and then wrap up with Regent Kenyanya, unless I missed anybody.
Thank you.
I know you're looking for another opportunity, but we got to keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I go into my comments, I would just say, Chief Clark, as one member of this board, I'd be interested, to the extent you're willing to share more data about where the challenges in the community, where the lack of support or hostility toward our officers might be coming from. If you're comfortable passing that along, I'd be interested in that. On the main issue, I've got a kind of micro comment and then a macro question. So as it relates to the incidents of the last days with 1721 University, I think it's really important how we address these matters with the public. As the chair knows, some of us were in the inbox right away when these things were going down, talking about getting a message out. I think that we've had good messaging when it comes to safety concerns, but I would like to see more of it. I think that it's really critical for the community to understand very quickly how this is a fundamental, no question, priority for the university. The safety of our community, our students, staff, faculty, everybody. It's so important. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that for an institution like ours that needs not only public support, but public comfort with sending kids and offspring to the institution in this environment, it's as if somebody was tampering with a national brand painkiller. I mean, if you don't get in front of it, you can, for a generation, have a severe detrimental impact on people's comfort with your institution. And I think that would be truly tragic. And I think that, we've all been hearing from families, from students and parents about concerns with safety. And I would suggest we're hearing from a very small percentage of the people who actually have those significant concerns. So I think as an institution, being in front of these things or getting out in front of these things when they occur as quickly as possible is really important, and to ensure that the public understands that, not just as an institution, but even with us as a board, that this is a priority. And I also would join Regent Farnsworth in thanking the board leadership for putting this on the docket this quickly. And I believe the public would appreciate that as well. On the macro point, and this goes to a kind of a broader question, and it's been touched on a little bit by other conversations here. We are in a unique setting as an institution of our size. And when you think about our history and the fact that we really were a commuter campus, there was, at one point only one dormitory and with people commuting in from miles to campus, all the way to, 20 years ago, where we were still overwhelmingly a commuter campus. We are now a residential campus, at least in terms of a diameter within which people live. But we have never really caught up. As you've heard me say at this board before, we have the fewest dorms per student, the fewest dorm beds per student in our conference among our peers. So that means we have a lot of students that are living outside of university housing out in the community. Another objective fact we can't get around is Minneapolis Police Department is really in trouble, is really struggling right now. The numbers are down. The environment is a challenge. And we can throw our hands up and say, well, our students happen to live in Minneapolis. There's just nothing we can do about it. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's good enough for this board. I don't think it's good enough for the university. And so my question within that unique context and with our current circumstances, and it sounds like a little improvident to ask the question now, because we're already challenged to fill the slots that we have right now. But to what extent are we able to take a larger role? Could we have an agreement with the Minneapolis Police Department where we take a larger role that includes many areas that are not exclusively university facilities, so that we as an institution can tell the people for whom we work, albeit at unfortunate compensation, that we can tell them that we are taking this seriously and we're doing all that we can to ensure that everybody within this environment is being protected to the greatest extent that we can. A 50% increase in crime in that general area is not something that I'm willing to say, oh, well, I guess that's just what it's going to be. I think we need to do more. Do we have that capacity, and what would it take from us as an institution to make that happen?
Chief Clark.
Regent Rocha, Mr. Chair, we don't have the capacity right now to take that on. My promise to parents that I've talked to, many of them in the last 2 years, was that if your student calls for help off campus in one of the neighborhoods, we would respond if Minneapolis is not available. And we are maxed out on that promise. We are about 30% faster for the highest life safety calls that we get every month. We get about 100 out of the 20,000 we get a year. There's about 100, 120 priority one calls that we get. Some of them, many of them now are generated off campus. Our officers, by about a minute and a half or 30%, are quicker than Minneapolis because we have GPS systems with our dispatch programs. So we know exactly how long it takes. That is the promise that I'm going to continue to fulfill. That's a very basic promise. We can't take all the other calls in other neighborhoods. We don't have the ability to do that. If we had additional officers, that's possible. One of the things that Senior Vice President Franz and I talk a lot about is making sure that we're at a competitive salary rate. Right now, I know a lot of the Hennepin and Ramsey chiefs. I meet with them monthly. They're all trying to outbid each other, and there's a lot less people in the system. And so there are officers moving for better salary. But like I said, it's really about their families. It's really about the environment. That's why they're making the changes. So having a positive working environment, having the right competitive salary, and increasing our numbers, we can do more off campus, but we can't take it all on. Minneapolis has to step up.
Thank you.
SPP France.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And the question really does, Chief Clark's answer was good, but it does really get to the heart of the matter. And these problems, we're not unique, right? We're not unique in this problem happening here. Obviously, we have to take care of the problems that do happen here. I'm not trying to offload this responsibility. I'm just saying it is a larger problem. And that's one of the reasons that we do work closely with MPD and the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department and other facilities. But, I think as a community, and when I say community, I mean the Twin Cities as a community, every community is facing this around the country. We have to come to grips with how do we address some of the criminal justice questions that you raised, Regent Powell? How do we address equity issues? How do we address access? It is a big, big problem. I'm not saying not saying that to say we can't be dealt with in different ways. There are micro solutions, if you will, but I don't think we can forget the macro problem here is pretty large, and we all need to lean into that in different ways that we can lean into that. And we're trying to lean in the best we can with the resources we have, and we're open to suggestions always. But I do think we need everyone in the community to lean in. How do we all collectively make our communities safer? And I mean, I don't, like I said, I'm not posing that to take the focus away from what we need to do here. We need to do it, but it is a large issue that communities need to deal with.
Hey, Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chief Clark, Senior Vice President Franz, and everyone for the really important discussion. I mean, I think what we're seeing in this conversation, a lot of it is getting outside of the scope of the property because it's important, right? And I think when we not first, or some of the past times we've talked about MSAFE, I believe the president, you talked about how, there were some immediate things we could immediately do, not low, but perhaps lower hanging fruit that we addressed. We see the body worn camera on Chief Clark. I think that was one of them. But there were some other ones that would take longer and would require more effort. Obviously not the time to have that conversation, but I think this conversation is showing that at some point we're going to want to come back to that and talk about where we are on some of those. But I again do want to offer my thanks to everyone who was engaged in the communication and action behind this specific property, administration, Chief Clark and your team, and Regent Farnsworth. I mean, we're all engaged, but I think, you were particularly engaged with that issue. On the, I guess, a couple comments and then a question to end. I think we hear from, or at least I do, from parents more than even students, right? I mean, that's understandably so, right? And that's a really important stakeholder to make sure we're communicating with. So the forum or meeting that you suggested, I mean, I think that's something worth exploring, seeing how we can, have them consulted more, and as well with our neighbors, right? The other folks and businesses who live near campus and in the adjacent neighborhoods. I'm sure some of that already occurs, but to the extent we can increase that, I see Vice Chancellor Irwin, who leads, I think one of those meetings each semester on her campus, and I think it's very effective. Now to my questions. One's taking us a little further back on the lease and the eviction we spoke about, General Counsel Peterson. If that clause or whatever is triggered, requiring the co-op to pay the remaining amount of the loan, if they're able to produce that, does that then close that avenue in terms of if they pay that amount, they get to continue owning the property? Or because they failed to keep the property in good standing, do they have to forfeit that either way? That's the first question. And then the second one, Chief Clark, you talked about being able to respond to the priority one calls. I mean, I think most of us can imagine what a priority one is. Can you help delineate where that ends, what becomes a priority two, and some of those things that you're less able to respond to? Mr. Chair?
Yeah, so let's start with you, Chief Clark, and then we'll pick up the legal question with General Counsel Peterson.
So Regent Kenyanya, Mr. Chair, priority one call is anything that's a life safety call or an act of violence. And so we average about 100 to 120 of those calls a month. And as we talked about, we average about 20,000 calls a year. We just want to make sure that when anyone's calling on campus or off campus, we're able to get to that call as quickly as possible. We do it about 4.5 minutes on average based on all of our data. My concern is that as you increase that time, it makes it a clear risk to public safety that officers aren't able to get there right away. Anything above and beyond that, we try to turn over in Minneapolis because we don't want to be off campus and have somebody call and not be available. The example is we spent about 4, maybe 5 hours at 1721 the other night. And there weren't enough people to handle things on campus. That's our first priority. So when we're averaging a supervisor and 3 officers per shift, and we have 3 shifts a day, you can see how you get spread pretty thin if there's multiple calls, and there's 20,000 to answer in a year.
General Counsel Peterson on the question that Regent Kenyanya posed.
Yeah, Chair McMillan, Regent Kenyanya, under the covenants, there's an obligation to continue to pay on the loan on a timely basis. There's not a breach of that covenant. The breach here is with regard to the fitness or the condition of the property. So whichever prong one begins a foreclosure proceeding on, the property owner has a right to cure. So they have a right to make a rehabilitation of the property. And, ultimately it's going to be up to a court assessing that foreclosure proceeding on how much time an entity may have to do that. In addition, because we're talking about a loan amount, which in this case has a balance due somewhere slightly in excess of $80,000, there's always the option of the owner to simply refinance that obligation with a different entity and remove the ability of UMFREA to have this foreclosure leverage. So maybe what I want to impress on everybody is that, as we're giving this serious problem a lot of attention, that's only sort of one legal option within what I believe are a repertoire of options. And some of the legal remedies and some of the strongest legal remedies rest with the public authorities, the city and the county. And I can kind of spell out a spectrum for you as I've spelled out for the attorney representing the Students Cooperatives, Inc. And those remedies include the non-renewal of their occupancy license by the city of Minneapolis, citations for the ordinance violations, the public health violations, given the condition of the property. If there's sufficient number of violations, a city condemnation of the property. The county can bring a public nuisance action as another potential remedy for this situation. We have the UMFREA foreclosure opportunity, which needs to be well grounded and, as I say, would ideally work off of a condemnation decision by the city of Minneapolis. And then I have in mind the fact that we're sitting with the situation where the property is unfit. In other words, it's a blight on University Avenue, and it's run by an entity that has lost control. And so for me, that triggers the question of whether or not this is an opportunity for the university to exercise its eminent domain power, because we are a public authority, and that needs an assessment of kind of the public purpose as to why we would exercise that power. But I think facing sort of this host of ways that the law attempts to address a problem situation like this when a property owner isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, gives not only us a few options to pursue, in the city and county a number of options to pursue, but in addition leads to a question for this Student Cooperative, Inc. entity as to whether or not they are suited to continue to own it, and whether or not somebody else should step in and take responsibility for the property.
Thank you, General Counsel Peterson. So I've got 2 more regents who haven't spoke yet, 2 who'd like to speak. I'm just going to remind everybody that on July 13th, the full board, we are the full board, has a public safety planning for 2022-23 topic that's going to consume a good chunk of that day. And I think everything being discussed here, maybe not so specific to this property, is fair game in the middle of that discussion too, as we look forward. So Regent Verhalen and then Regent Hips, please keep them quick because we are now eating into the presidential performance review. So
understood.
Maybe the president would like that. But.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I I'd like to key off Chief Clark's comment on treatment of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities police officers and Regent Roche's comment about communication of public safety activities when they are underway. We as regents are contacted by concerned parents, students, staff, faculty, other stakeholders. And additionally, we're out in the community in various ways, both physically and virtually. In situations like this, with 1721, it's crucially incumbent upon us as regents that when we are responding to those requests for information or proactively sharing our concerns about these or similar situations, that we also effectively communicate where our administration and our University of Minnesota Police Department are actively engaged within their legal authority. To Chief Clark's point about support from the top down, it really drove home for me, and I'm sure all of my fellow regents, that we are the top here, and we should really internalize that position as we go forward and as we make statements about these and other critical issues. So thank you for that reminder, Chief Clark.
Thank you, Regent Verhalen. Regent Hipsch, you can wrap us up.
Thank you. Just a quick question for Chief Counsel. Can we hold the Board of Directors from the co-op responsible personally for breaking their responsibility?
General Counsel Peterson.
Regent Hipsch, I don't have a researched answer to that question. You know, when kind of individual board members can be individually liable is a kind of specialized question. So I would hesitate to throw that into the mix because I do think that's a delicate question. And I don't want to kind of suggest that that's an option, even though it's a fair question on your part. I mean, when I look at these remedies, to me, I think the focus just has to stay on what can we do vis-a-vis this particular property and make sure that on a going forward basis, it's owned and controlled by a responsible party. And we have, between the city, the county, and the university, we have some kind of potent tools here. And hopefully they will play out in a way where they will work together in a community fashion to redress this problem without having to kind of research and reach the question you've raised. So if you don't mind, I think deferring it is the better course.
Okay, thank you, and apologies to my colleagues that I didn't get around to for a second time, but good discussion on a tough topic. Thank you. And well, brings us to the consent report, and there's some significant items in there that I'm going to ask Senior Vice President Franz to summarize.
Well, Mr. Vice Chair, I have the opportunity to turn it over first to President Gable. We have some exciting news as part of our employment contract here.
Oh, all right.
Members of the
President
board,
Gable.
Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board, I'm delighted to announce that Dr. Shashank Priya will serve as our next Vice President for Research effective September 30th, pending your approval. Dr. Priya is a leading scholar, researcher, and administrator with deep experience and relationships across academia, industry, and the public sector, including at land-grant institutions. Since 2018, Dr. Priya has served as Penn State's University Associate Vice President for Research and Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Senior Vice President for Research. He is also a professor of material science and engineering. We are really looking forward to welcoming Dr. Priya as the next leader of our world-class top 10 research enterprise. He'll report directly to me, as has been tradition, and serve as a key member of the President's Cabinet and senior leadership team. The details of his agreement are in the supporting materials. And for these reasons, and as described in the supporting materials in the docket, I recommend the appointment of Dr. Shashank Priya as the next Vice President for Research at the University of Minnesota.
Very good.
Mr. Vice Chair, we have three other contracts as well in the employment agreement section of the Scott Sandlin for head coach at men's hockey at Duluth campus, Ben Johnson, the head coach of men's basketball at Twin Cities campus, and Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator of men's football at Twin Cities campus. Those are in the consent as well. We have some purchase items, typical purchase items, and we have an amendment to the retirement plan. We have Vice President Horstman here who can answer any questions about that, but it's highly technical and conforming with prior law. We have the engagement of a debt advisor and a real estate transaction that is fairly minor at the state fair. So those are the items in the consent report, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, and as is our custom here, if anybody would like to ask a question about anything in the docket or make a comment, you're welcome to do that. Or if you'd like to separate anything out that we would then not handle in one vote, we can do that as well. So let me stop there and see what the pleasure of my colleagues might be. No questions, and you're okay with a vote on the full consent calendar?
I missed something.
Oh, wait. Vice President Franz, or SVP Franz, what did, you have something else?
This is your birthday. You can call me whatever you want to. man. I failed to neglect that the Arboretum also has some appointments.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to make sure that everyone was aware of that too.
All right.
I'll move it.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded as a group of items. Discussion now that it's before us for discussion. Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That takes us to information items. You want to summarize those for us? They're not quite as numerous as normal.
That's true, Mr. Chair. We really have a Central Reserves contingency allocation and where there are no transactions this month. We have the update on the Investment Advisory Council meeting that was held on May 11th. And we also have the new development and the schedule for the Campus Climate Action Plan. So in your document material, you can see when we're planning to do these campus plans in the future. It's an exciting way to coordinate all these plans together. We're looking forward to moving on all those plans. Those are the items in the information docket, Mr. Chair.
Very good. And before I gavel us to a close, I'd remind regents that the Presidential Performance Review Committee meeting starts immediately. So don't linger. And where do we need to go, Mr. Langworthy?
The West Committee Room.
The West Committee Room. So please proceed there without too many detours. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so